At the Adelhart estate, a tense conversation was currently taking place between a man and a woman. The lady with pink hair nervously put the cup with barely sipped tea on the saucer and was very nervous, not daring to look up. After all, sitting in front of her, glaring at her, was Duke Cassius Adelhart himself. And although the girl tried to look friendly, she understood that the Duke looked at her as his worst enemy, and he was, to some extent, right. "So, what made you come here without warning?" Red Eyes stared at her. She clasped her hands nervously in her lap, but tried her best to collect her thoughts. "Your Grace." The girl finally dared to raise her blue eyes to him. "I want to break off our engagement." Her words sounded firm. The man twitched nervously, but tried to maintain his composure. And then he asked if she understood what she was talking about. "You know that neither of us wants this fictitious marriage," was her answer. "It all happened a week ago. The road, the bright light, the loud sound, and the impact. A scarlet puddle was spreading across the asphalt, a broken phone was lying nearby, and people around were screaming. It all started with an accident. After some time, she opened her eyes with difficulty and saw an unfamiliar environment around her. When she woke up, she realized that she was in a completely different world. Moreover, the sensations of her own body were unusual, and she immediately rushed to the mirror. Seeing the reflection, she experienced an indescribable range of emotions. Reborn into the world of a fantasy novel, as usually happens in books, she became none other than Ibelia Barnine. Ibelia Barnine was a heroine of a book with a very difficult fate. By marrying Cassis, she became Lucius's stepmother, a terribly treacherous and unimaginably cruel stepmother. Like her stepson, Ibelia was an illegitimate child. But unlike her, everyone in the duchy loved Lucius and cared for him. Ibelia was simply consumed with jealousy. She believed that the child was obliged to go through the same pain that she did, and she resorted to physical abuse against Lucius. Caught red-handed, Ibelia was thrown out into the streets, where she contracted some disease and later met her death in a monastery. And she, Seo Yun-hun, was one of those readers who was delighted that the villain got what she deserved. She's far from the only commentator, so why did she end up in her body? Well, at any rate, Ibelia has not yet married Cassis. It is easier to cut off the ends now than after marriage. She is willing to do a lot in order to survive. She is even ready to be nice to young Lucius, but that is not her main problem. The biggest problem is Cassius Adelhart. She doesn't want to marry someone who despises her. And she doesn't need his wealth, because it will turn her life into hell. Lost in thought, the girl reached the right room and made a firm decision. Yes, she will break up with Cassis and build her own life. She will change the course of the original story. "Is this what you want yourself, or the whim of Count Barnane?" the man asked after listening to Ibelia, to which she replied that her father was not aware. The Duke rose from his seat, announcing that in that case the conversation was over. "I'll pretend this conversation never happened. Look at yourself from the outside," the man added, but Ibelia didn't give up. In an effort to stop him, the girl grabbed the Duke's hand, but he instantly pulled it away, his expression at that moment quite irritated. Ibelia expected such a reaction, but tried to answer calmly and without emotion. She knows why he agreed to marry her, the illegitimate daughter of a count. Ibelia is sure that her father offered to marry her in exchange for silence. Technically, it was more like a threat. "Since you know, then why do you still want to break off the engagement?" Cassius became seriously angry. But the girl promised to provide him with all the necessary information, and in return asked him to break off their engagement. "How did you get this information?" The Duke was taken aback. But the girl replied that she couldn't tell him that, and mentally added that it would be strange to answer that she had read about it in a book, but she assured him that there had been no leak. "Only my father and I know about this, so what do you say?" Your Highness Ibelia waited for an answer. The man was silent, and then, sighing heavily, he replied that he would think about it, and now she could go. Having said goodbye, Ibelia Barnane, maintaining her dignity, left the room and headed towards the exit. However, despite everything, it was rather rude of him not to see her off. Lost in her thoughts, the girl sighed tiredly, and then heard someone call her. "Lady Barnane, if you don't mind," began a quiet, thin voice. Right in front of her stood a boy with dark hair and big red eyes, looking pleading. The moment she saw him, Ibelia realized that this child was Lucius. However, the fact that the boy asked to join him for tea surprised her greatly. The nurse, who was following the young gentleman, remarked that he should first greet the lady, and Lucius remembered his mistake as he was about to introduce himself. "Hello, young Mr. Adelhart." The girl greeted him with a smile, inadvertently interrupting him. But the child was not upset, but only opened his eyes in surprise. It was the first time he had been greeted like that, and he thought that this girl was not like everyone else. And when he looked up at her, he asked in surprise if she really knew him, To which Abelia replied that it was hard not to recognize him because he was a copy of the Duke. "As you already know, I am Abelia Barnane," the girl introduced herself and curtsied. "As for tea drinking," she thought without finishing her sentence, "if she agrees, Lucius will begin to hope that she will become a stepmother." And even now, the boy looked at her with such hope in his eyes. She would still have to do it. "I beg your pardon, young master, but I cannot agree to this," Abelia answered nevertheless. Deciding that this was better than giving him false hope before breaking off the engagement, the girl replied that since she was engaged, she did not think she could accept his proposal. Lucius immediately wilted and his hands began to tremble slightly. The boy asked for forgiveness for being so rude. However, the girl hastened to assure him that it was her fault, and also added that she was forced to leave and said goodbye to the young gentleman. Lucius Adelhart, the sole heir of Duke Cassius Adelhart, remained standing where he was, watching as Abelia Barnane walked away towards the exit. Lucius Adelhart is the illegitimate son of Cassius Adelhart. In the original, he was cold-blooded just like his father, a man capable of killing without a shred of regret. This is how Lucius spent his childhood, all alone in this cruel world full of human indifference. One day, Cassius Adelhart declared Lucius his heir in front of the entire council. "What are you saying, Duke? You must choose a duchess who will give birth to a legitimate successor?" The advisors intervened, not understanding how an illegitimate child, and a commoner at that, could become the heir to the ducal family. One of those present even said that he understood his concern for the young master, but if he had a legitimate heir, he would very soon change his mind. The Duke did not listen to their indignation for long and ordered everyone to be silent. "This is my decision. Anyone who tries to challenge it will lose their head," the man said coldly. He was determined to give Lucius everything that was due to him by birthright. "If that's all, you can go free," he informed everyone present and rose from his seat. The man was determined and was not going to listen to anyone's objections. Opening the door, he walked out of the negotiation room, still maintaining his stern face, even when he saw that rose petals were scattered in front of the door. At this moment, Lucius was already running away from the opened door straight into the garden. He hid behind one of the columns, holding fresh white rosebuds in his hands and thinking about what he had heard. But his thoughts were interrupted by women's conversations that reached him from the garden. Perhaps the young master's mother was a commoner, if not worse, discussed the women at the table, the wives of the Duke's advisors. Knowing the Duke, he would have married even a fallen noblewoman, but the fact that he accepted only the young master means a lot, the gossips continued. Could it be that the young gentleman's mother's status was even lower than that of a commoner, they concluded. Then one of the lamas suggested that if she were the Duke's wife, she would send this child to a boarding school. Another added that it was too sweet of her. If she had been the Duke's wife, the child would have ended up in a monastery long ago. In this harsh reality, Lucius dreamed of only one thing. Every night before going to bed, the boy prayed to all the gods he knew. "Please let me have a mother." The child's desire was so great. Abelia Barnane returned home after her trip to the estate of Count Barnane. The coachman reported that they were there and helped the lady out of the carriage. The girl couldn't get the image of Lucius out of her head. It looked like he was crying. Maybe she should have agreed at least once. One tea party wasn't so bad. If she weren't in Abelia's body, she could take better care of Lucius. "No, what am I thinking about?" She immediately pulled herself up short. After all, in this situation, she can only break off the engagement and live her own life. As soon as the girl entered the house, she was already greeted with the question of where she had been. In fact, she was already tired of this whole situation. Besides, this person shouldn't have been in the mansion. "I'm asking where you were." Derek Barnane, Abelia's half-brother, was eager to hear her answer. The girl closed her eyes. Did he really go all this way just to anger her? How sweet, if you think about it. Abelia is also a victim. Abelia's mother was a servant in the Barnane's house. She was incredibly beautiful, so one day she attracted the attention of the Count. And soon a pink-haired baby girl, Abelia, was born. Fearing abuse at the mansion, Abelia's mother fled but soon after fell ill with the plague. Worried that her daughter would be left alone, she turned to the Count. However, upon receiving the letter, he was not at all happy about such news. Crumpling the letter in his hands, he promised himself to kill them both. And soon he was already heading to the house where Abelia and her mother lived, with the intention of doing what he had planned, but until he met his daughter. Having carefully examined the girl, he realized that this child was very similar to her mother and could fetch a high price on the marriage market. Little Abelia, frightened all this time, sat right in front of the Count, awaiting her future fate. And the man gave her a choice: she would go with him or stay here, and if she went with him, he would help her mother. Ibelia, who essentially had no choice, became a hostage of this mansion. The anger of the Earl's second son, Derek, was especially always directed at Ibelia. As she walked up the stairs, she thought that she wanted today to be a quiet day. However, her wish was not destined to come true, and soon she was roughly grabbed by the arm. "Are you crazy? You're ignoring me now," Derek said indignantly. But Ibelia replied that she had nothing to say to him, so let him pass. She was a little tired today. However, the man became seriously angry and was indignant at the way she was talking to him, to which the girl replied that he should call her sister. "You are only so brave because of your engagement to Duke Adelhart, but that doesn't change anything," the young man said angrily. Ibelia countered that on the contrary, if she married the Duke, she would become one of the 3 duchesses of the Empire. And he, who had not even managed to obtain the title of Count, but she did not have time to finish, because in an instant she saw a flash of rage in Derek's eyes, and she felt herself being pulled back, down the high stairs. Letting go of her hand, young Barnon pushed the girl down with both hands. The first thing she saw when she opened her eyes was the chandelier in her room. Consciousness gradually returned, and lying in bed, Ibelia remembered that she had definitely fallen down the stairs, but she did not understand what exactly had happened. At that moment, her maid entered the room and asked if everything was all right with her mistress and if she was hurt. And when the girl replied that her body was a little sore, Ibelia's personal maid, Annie, sympathetically told her that young Master Derek had pushed her down the stairs. Derek, what a bastard, Ibelia thought, but she couldn't do anything about it. The maid gave her some painkillers and added that the doctor told her to rest. Annie also handed the lady a sealed envelope with a seal bearing the coat of arms of the Adelhart family land. The girl took it, but was surprised why the Adelharts would write to her. "Lady Ibelia, hello, this is Lucius," the letter began. "The teacher said that in order to invite someone to visit, you need an invitation. This time I will prepare even more delicacies for tea. You will come, I will wait for you," so wrote young Mr. Adelhart. Ibelia was reading this letter carefully when she noticed that a few drops had fallen on it, and she realized with surprise that these were her tears, and that she was crying. But why is she crying? Perhaps it reminded her of her own story. For her, who grew up without a mother, Lucius's feelings were more understandable than anyone else. Her father's woman also appeared in her life. She always tried her best to be kind to the girl and showered her with gifts. The appearance of her stepmother in her life was like a dream. Every day she dreamed that they would become a happy family. Well, that's in the past, as one day little Seo Yoon heard her father's wife suggesting that she be given to her relatives. After all, one day a second child will be born, and she will not be able to take care of both of them alone. Or she suggested sending her to a boarding school, because she heard that these days they have all the amenities. Because she knows how painful it is, she doesn't want to give little Lucius false hope. Ibelia wrote a reply, sealed the envelope, and handed it to the maid, instructing her to send it to the Adelharts. When the maid left on her mistress's errand, the girl sighed slightly and relaxed in her chair, indulging in her thoughts. Either way, no matter what happened yesterday, Derek is a complete bastard. He was definitely deliberately mocking her. And first of all, Ibelia must take revenge on Derek, and only then break off the engagement with Cassis. But even if she manages to break off the engagement, Count Barnen will not give up trying to marry her off, so Ibelia must escape from the Count's estate as far as possible. Thinking like this, she put on a long cloak. The girl realized that she would need money and something else. And for the latter, she needs to find an information guild, which she will do right now. Meanwhile, life went on as usual at the Adelhart mansion. Lucius held the letter in his hands and happily told the nanny that a reply had arrived from Ibelia. The woman was sincerely happy to see her pupil's joy and offered to read it, but the boy wanted to read it himself. "I hope you are in good health. Thank you for your repeated invitation to tea. Unfortunately, I have to decline, because I have no free time at all." This was Ibelia's answer to the young gentleman, and the more Lucius read, the sadder he became. And finally, he asked the nanny if it was possible that it was all because of his origin, and that was why his father and Ibelia did not like him, and that was why they were breaking off the engagement. The woman hastened to assure the boy that the Duke valued him very much, but Lucius was not convinced by her words, because in his heart he felt guilty. "Nanny, do you think I can convince her?" Hope flashed in the child's voice, and the nanny confirmed it. "Then I need to prepare a gift for Lady Ibelia," Lucius rejoiced. "After all, everyone loves gifts, and maybe if she likes it, she'll change her mind." "Yes, let's try," the nanny agreed, but it hurt her to watch how the boy wanted with all his might to be loved. Meanwhile, Ibelia had gotten out into the city and was wandering the streets in search of the right house. "Young master, please take your time." She heard a voice nearby and recognized it. Lucius, inspired, ran and at the same time urged the nanny to hurry after him, which turned out to be a mistake the next moment. The sound of a dull fall echoed through the crowded street, followed by the worried cries of women passing by, which Abelia tried her best to ignore. It couldn't stop her from moving on. Just move on, she told herself. I can't help myself. Just a second later, the girl turned around and headed towards Lucius. Lucius sat on the ground and bitter tears welled up in the boy's eyes. "Young master, you are not hurt?" Abelia hurried towards him, removing the hood from her head as she went. Lucius's eyes widened in surprise when he saw Lady Barnaine standing in front of him. The girl asked him to get up because the ground was cold, and also suggested that he return to the estate for examination by the doctor. "No, I came to buy a gift for you." The boy refused without thinking. However, the lady insisted that in such a situation, the gift was not the most important thing, and his health was much more important. Realizing that she showed concern for him, Lucius blushed. "Then, come with me, Lady Abelia," the young gentleman invited the girl again. And he still really wants to invite Lady Abelia to tea. And the girl could not resist such persistence of the young Master Adelhart. There were all kinds of cakes, cookies, candies, and other sweets on the table. Looking at all this abundance, Abelia thought only that she had no time for such things. However, at that moment, Lucius offered the lady to try another sweet, and the girl agreed with a smile. "By the way, young master, why did you want to invite me to tea today?" she asked. The boy was very embarrassed and did not dare to answer, but still asked if she could become his mother. At first, Abelia was taken aback by such a frank question, unable to squeeze out a word. And although she sincerely understood his feelings, she was forced to apologize, saying that she could not be his mother, from which Lucius assumed that this was because he was an illegitimate child. That's not the point. The girl was trapped, and she really didn't want to offend or upset the child. Luckily for her, at that moment the Duke came out onto the terrace and sternly asked what she was doing there. Lucius let out a frightened gasp and stared at his father with his big eyes. And the girl thought with understanding that such a reaction was exactly in the spirit of the Duke. The reason Abelia can't be left alone with Lucius is the secret that got the Duke cornered by Count Barnaine. And it lies in the fact that Lucius is not Cassis's biological child. There is one name that must not be mentioned in the Adelhart estate. And this is the name of the eldest daughter of the late Duke Adelhart and sister of Cassis, Julia Adelhart. For Cassis, who was abused by his father under the pretext of preparing to inherit the title, she would be the only outlet. Julia was the only one he could call his family, and only his older sister always said that Cassis was not guilty of anything and he should not worry. But over time, fate separated them, and they entered different academies. And so, over time, the boy came to his senses and showed unprecedented fortitude. He was especially pleased with the thought that now Julia could escape from her father. But one day he returned home and found his sister in a very bad condition. "Julia, what the hell happened?" he asked his sister, who was crying in the middle of a destroyed room with traces of blood. "It was my father who did this," Lucius asked in a low voice, but his sister did not answer, because everything was clear without words. The endless violence against Julia, who became pregnant without knowing the father of the child, and Cassis, who knew the truth, always protected Julia from the Duke. Still a teenager himself, the future Duke was very worried about his older sister, and she lit up the world around him with her smile, thanking her younger brother for protecting her and her child. Julia died due to complications during childbirth. Cassis was wary of the ridicule of his sister, who died giving birth to an illegitimate child. And so, taking on the burden of condemnation from those around him, he accepted her child, Lucius, as his own son, and then set about searching for his biological father. A year ago, something happened at the Adelhart estate that made him very worried about the boy. The doctor who was called reported that the young gentleman had suddenly had a seizure, but Cassis did not understand what was happening. Everyone was especially worried about the strange flaming symbol on the chest of the exhausted Lucius. The doctor explained that the young gentleman did not just have a fever, but must have an innate curse that manifested itself in the form of a symbol, and it seemed to be passed down in the family. After the doctor asked the Duke if he had any ideas about this, Cassis looked through all the books in the library in search of an answer. Having found nothing, the Duke angrily thought that it was definitely from Lucius's biological father. There could be no other option. Time passed inexorably, and finding information about the curse became increasingly difficult. And one day, Count Barnaine showed up at the estate, claiming that he could be very useful to the Duke. "It's about Lucius's biological parents," he told Cassis with a nasty smile. However, Duke Adelhart had no intention of playing games and asked him again what he meant, since Lucius was his own son. Cassis had no intention of revealing his secret to anyone, especially to such a slippery type as Count Barnane. However, when he revealed that Lucius's biological mother was his older sister, Julia Adelhart, it was as if a stone had been placed on the Duke's shoulders. "And the owner of such platinum hair is Lucius's own father," added Count Barnane, shaking a small envelope. "And while we're on the subject, he has a business proposal for the Duke. If you take my daughter Ibelia as your wife, I will keep everything a secret." It sounded like an open threat of blackmail. But if Duke Adelhart refuses, then the whole public will know about this secret. And since Ibelia asks for a divorce in exchange for information about Lucius's real father, it is only natural that Cassis is wary of their meetings. "Father, Ibelia has nothing to do with this. I invited her to us." The boy tried to explain everything to the Duke, but he sent his son to his room. Lucius didn't want to do this and kept trying to protect Lady Barnane. However, Ibelia herself asked the young master to listen, since she needed to talk to the Duke. When they were alone, Cassis asked the reason for her visit, to which the girl replied that she had met the young gentleman by chance in the market and had simply accepted his invitation to tea. "It seems I have spoiled the Duke's mood. If you are uncomfortable, I will leave right now." Ibelia stood up, and at that moment the sleeve of her dress was pulled up, revealing the bruises on the girl's wrist. The dark spots on her delicate skin did not go unnoticed by the Duke, and then he acted on emotions. The man instantly blocked her path, not allowing her to escape. Where did these wounds come from? They were inflicted by Count Barnane. He firmly but carefully grabbed Ibelia's hand, demanding an answer. And when the girl sheepishly replied that this was not so, he assumed that it was the work of her brothers. "Duke, this is not something to worry about while we are in the process of breaking off the engagement," the girl tried to reason with him. But the man objected that this was precisely what he had to worry about, since he had not yet agreed to break off the engagement. And since the lady is his fiancée, he believes that he has the right to ask questions of his fiancée. Ibelia thought that in fact he did not consider her his bride. But she answered out loud that these were just scratches from yesterday's fall down the stairs and asked to let her go. Reluctantly, Cassis let go of her hand and said that he would prepare a carriage for her. Soon he was already hurrying down the corridor and thinking about the current situation. The man's body was tense, and at first he walked too fast, but at some point he stopped abruptly. "Logan, find out how Lady Ibelia is treated at the mansion," he ordered his assistant. He still couldn't forget the wounds on her hands, because they looked like traces of violence. And if his suspicions turn out to be true, then he won't be able to leave everything as is. The ducal carriage drove calmly through the forest, carrying the guest on the orders of Duke Adelhart. Ibelia asked the coachman to drop her off at Courtney Street, but the servant explained that he had orders to take her to the Barnane estate. "There is one unfinished business, please. Just this once," the girl asked sincerely. Soon they arrived at the above-mentioned street, which the coachman informed the lady about. Entering one of the buildings, the girl thought that this was the very place. She slowly closed the door behind her and walked to the bar at the opposite end of the room. Ibelia gently rapped her fist on the table 3 times and spoke her prepared sentence. "One ascent, please, with lemon and ice," the girl said with a smile. Ascent is a cocktail popular throughout the Empire. However, in this tavern, ascent is the secret code of the Sierra Information Guild. The young man behind the counter asked her if she knew the meaning of this phrase, and the girl confirmed it with a smile. Knocking on the table 3 times and asking for an ascent with lemon and ice was the code for requesting a meeting with the leader of Sierra. 13 years after Cassis's death, the significant events of this work took place. Cassis's son found a portrait of Julia Adelhart in a secret room. Lucius, having learned the truth about his origins, decided that Cassis had betrayed him. He began exchanging information with Sierra, establishing a close relationship with its leader, Samuel Denoa. But the main reason for Ibelia's desire to hire them is a completely different fact, that by accepting the guild's strict policy of exchanging information for information, she would sign a contract with it. And using everything she knows, convincing Samuel will definitely not be difficult for her. "I've contacted the leader, so please wait a bit," the young man said after leading the lady into the inner room. He also offered her a drink while she waited, and the girl gratefully accepted the glass. However, before taking a sip, she looked carefully at the young man standing in front of her. He looked quite ordinary, but the smell coming from him was impossible to ignore. Something like this is hard to come by for anyone, no matter how rich they are. The soothing scent of Lizer herbs. "What are you doing?" the young man said in fear after the girl suddenly grabbed his hand. Ibelia replied that she had no reason to continue waiting. because the leader of the Sierra, Sir Samuel, is already in this room. The young man, although surprised, calmly asked how she found out about this. They say that Sir Samuel's younger sister is very ill, so she constantly burns the herb Lysera, which acts as a sedative, and you also smell of it, explained Ibelia. And the ring on his index finger is an artifact that allows him to change his appearance. For a few moments, the young man looked at the girl in surprise and then laughed cheerfully, saying that it was very exciting. I think you're worthy of my attention. Samuel twirled the ring on his finger. And at that moment, his hair changed color, his facial features were transformed. Samuel, the leader of Sierra, smiled dazzlingly and asked what the lady wanted. Ibelia put a heavy bag of money on the table and asked to borrow this artifact. In addition, she needed help in finding a woman who works as a doctor. She has red hair and green eyes. Lives most likely in the capital or somewhere nearby. Her name is Erin Lawner. When the young man asked about the payment, the lady pushed the bag towards him, noting that it was enough to cover the cost of finding a doctor, but she also planned to continue working with Sierra in the future. As a reward for this, I will tell you how to cure your sister, Ibelia smiled. The lady's last words left Samuel speechless. For 7 years, since Arya was born, they couldn't find anything, so how could the lady know the solution? The book is called Arya of Light. In other words, Samuel's younger sister, Arya, is the main character. She was fragile but kind. Lucius, who grew up distrusting people after the betrayal of Ibelia and Cassis, was touched by Arya's kindness, and the powerful divine power that was consuming her was the only light that could heal Lucius's curse. Try making some Talana flower syrup for your sister. It grows in the kingdom of Cessia and helps restore strength, the girl added. But Samuel doubted why he should believe her, to which Ibelia pointed out that it was up to him to decide whether the information was reliable. And until the data on the Talana flower is verified, he will not be able to offer the lady any other information. Ibelia understood everything, but it was still in his interests to find a doctor as soon as possible. If she helps Erin create a cure for Arya, it will make the deal with Samuel a lot easier. Okay? Anything else? Asked the young man. Smiling dazzlingly, the girl replied that there was something else she wanted to ask. Ibelia returned home when it was already completely dark. As she entered her room, she thanked God that she had not been caught. And just a moment later, the maid informed the lady that it was time for dinner, and the girl replied that she was already on her way. You are late, Ibelia. The whole family, led by Count Barnain, gathered in the dining room. Looking at her so-called father, the girl noted that he looked much more cruel than she expected. The man noticed her gaze and asked what she was looking at. Ibelia replied that she was just lost in thought. The dinner continued in silence, and the plates on the table became empty. Ibelia also silently picked at her plate with cutlery. Ibelia, the Count called, finishing his food and wiping his mouth with a napkin. The girl froze in surprise, not even bringing her fork to her mouth. I heard that you visited the Adelhard estate yesterday without telling me why you went there. The question was asked in a chilling tone. However, the girl was not at all embarrassed, and calmly put down the cutlery. Now a lie would have been the best choice, but the circumstances had changed somewhat. And so Ibelia confidently replied that she had asked the Duke to break off the engagement. What did you say? The Count managed to ask with difficulty, after the deathly silence that had settled in the room. I spoke with the Duke about breaking off the engagement. I thought I would tell you at the right time, the girl explained with a smile. But she didn't have time to finish, because events unfolded too quickly. In an instant, Count Barnain was at her side and gave his daughter a resounding slap in the face. Ibelia, not testing my patience, the man said angrily, radiating rage. As he left the dining room, he announced that he would speak to Duke Adelhart, warning her not to dare to mention breaking off the engagement again. Remember this, the Count said firmly, without even looking at his daughter. When the door closed behind the head of the family, Ibelia rose from her seat, intending to leave, but was stopped by her brother's question if she had gone mad. The girl, whose cheek was flushed and sore, looked at the speaker completely emotionlessly. You have nothing more to say, she asked her question in response. But Derek didn't understand what she wanted to hear from him. Maybe he'll apologize or ask if I'm okay, Ibelia explained. However, the young man only smiled maliciously at her words. He didn't consider himself guilty of anything. Besides, she had been talking nonsense lately, and she should stop interfering with the family's affairs and not be seen. That is, you are not going to apologize, the girl stated. I will never ask you for forgiveness in my life, Derek said, approaching his sister. And while he stood close to her, spewing anger, Ibelia quietly poured some liquid from a small bottle onto his feet. She had assumed that nothing good could be expected from him, so she was prepared. Derek had a chance to apologize to her, but he missed it. Earlier, Ibelia had told Samuel that there was someone she wished to push down the stairs, but only to injure him slightly. "Of all the requests we receive, this is the most restrained one," the young man noted. But nevertheless, the prospect of hurting someone still worried the girl. Soon, a smiling Samuel was handing her a small bottle of sparkling liquid. Still feeling a little uneasy, Ibelia sighed tiredly, wanting to leave this place as soon as possible. Meanwhile, important matters were also being decided at the Adelhart estate. Cassis's assistant provided the gentleman with the results of a small investigation at his request. Although the Count puts on a show of caring for Lady Barnon, he often neglects her at home. Moreover, even the Countess seems to mock her, using the lessons as a reason for hunger strikes and other restrictions. However, when the Duke asked about physical violence, the assistant replied that there was no such thing. Cassis thought about it, because it was hard to believe. If these were not signs of violence, then where did the wounds on her wrist come from? "I will visit the Barnane estate," the Duke announced, surprising his assistant with his suddenness. But Cassis was serious about checking something out for himself. The ducal carriage sped along the road towards the Barnane family mansion. The whole way, the Duke was absorbed in his own thoughts and reflections. It seemed he was on his way to save his fiancée from her family's abuse. But what if she says that she was not bullied? What will happen then? The man slightly regretted his actions, that he gave in to emotions without thinking at all. In fact, the cold-blooded Cassis Adelhart doesn't recognize himself at all. The arrival of Duke Adelhart caused quite a stir among the servants of the Barnon mansion. The butler tried to stop his lordship, assuring him that Lady Barnon was not well at the moment and offering to visit her at another time. But Cassis did not believe a single word of the servant, because only yesterday Ibelia was completely healthy, not counting the bruises on her wrists. That's why he categorically refused to leave, which left the servant dumbfounded. "I must see Lady Barnane at once." The man's tone brooked no objection. Ibelia sat in her room in front of a large mirror. A large red spot blossomed on the woman's delicate face, which stung mercilessly. However, the girl was not even almost upset to some extent. She received a small moral compensation. A little earlier, the maid reported that young Master Derek had fallen down the stairs. "What? He's not wounded?" Ibelia asked, feigning but quite lively. Annie replied that he had only broken his leg, worrying that the lady had recently fallen down the stairs. Gloating in her heart, the lady smiled faintly. "Well, it's probably just bad timing," she tried to reassure the maid. At least, Ibelia wouldn't have to see Derek for a while, which wasn't such a bad thing. Stretching out tiredly on the bed, the girl thought about whether she should rest for a day, pretending to be sick. But for some reason, as soon as she thought about rest, there was an insistent knock at the door. Lamenting that she would never be able to rest, the girl got out of bed and allowed the knocker to enter. "Madam, you have a visitor!" A worried maid burst into the room. Ibelia was surprised by the visitor, but she was even more surprised by the maid's reaction. Was she really making so much noise because of an ordinary visitor, to which the girl tried to justify herself by saying that this was an unusual visitor? Duke Adelhart walked confidently into the house. Despite all the attempts of the servants to stop him, he intends to see his bride today. Ibelia was incredibly surprised when she heard that her uninvited guest was Duke Adelhart, and he came completely without warning. Perhaps he came to give her an answer to the proposal to break off the engagement. The girl thoughtfully lightly touched her red cheek. But how can she meet him like this? Ibelia asked the maid to tell the Duke that she was not feeling well and to ask him to come back another time. The maid rushed to carry out her mistress's instructions, but returned after a while with an expression of horror on her face. "The Duke wants to meet the lady today no matter what. He will wait for her in the reception room." Having said this, Annie exhaled tiredly, and the girl realized that she had no other choice. Well, nothing can be done. Having said this, Ibelia got up from the bed, asking Annie to help her get ready. For the next half hour, the maid helped her mistress with her hair and makeup. Everything was ready, but the maid was worried that they had not managed to do anything about the mark from the blow, because it was impossible not to notice it. Ibelia looked closely at her reflection in the mirror. A beautiful girl with a red spot on her cheek was looking at her. Annie kept complaining that if the Duke saw this, they would be in deep trouble. Ibelia interrupted the girl's lamentations and asked her for one favor. She asked for the widest-brimmed hat available, as a plan had formed in her head. Soon Lady Barnane, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, walked confidently along the corridors of the mansion. She didn't have time to reach the guest room as her path was blocked. "Madam, I think you had better return to your room." The family butler stood before her, bowing respectfully. But Ibelia replied that Duke Adelhart was waiting for her. to which the butler explained that the Countess was already talking to him. Hearing this, Ibelia froze in bewilderment, wondering if the Countess herself had really condescended to talk. Is she really speaking to the Duke herself? But if so, then perhaps everything is for the best. "I'm not going to go back," the girl said confidently, adding that she couldn't make his lordship wait any longer. Soon she was approaching the doors of the guest room, which were slightly open. "Your Grace, as I have already said, Ibelia is not well now," the stepmother's voice was heard. The woman insisted that the Duke visit his bride at another time. Standing on the threshold of the room, the girl realized that Countess Barnain wanted to preserve her reputation at all costs, because if Ibelia appeared in such a form, she would destroy the image of a magnanimous wife that she had built. Hearing approaching footsteps, the woman sternly exclaimed that she had ordered not to let anyone in. Ibelia entered the room with a smile, anticipating the look on her face. As soon as the Countess saw her, her face was distorted with anger, but at the same time horror could be seen in her eyes. But the Duke was slightly displeased that the girl had only just arrived, to which Ibelia apologized, replying that she needed time to get herself together since his visit had happened so suddenly. And only after a few seconds did the Duke carefully examine the girl. "By the way, why are you wearing a weekend hat?" he asked the girl while she was fidgeting, covering her face with her hat. Realizing that something was wrong, the man stepped towards the girl and with one movement removed her hat from her head. The now unnecessary female accessory ended up lying on the floor. "This is also a wound from a fall?" he asked the stunned girl, already knowing the answer to his question. Countess Barnain was trying to explain that Ibelia was a little clumsy, but the Duke asked her to speak for herself and again asked Ibelia if it was a wound from a fall. "What kind of a man is he?" the girl thought, looking at Cassis. Could he really be so angry about this? "This is a trace of someone's blow," the Duke finished his question, his face darkening. He reached out and carefully took the girl's face, trying to get a closer look. No matter how you look at it, her wound can't possibly be the result of a fall. "Who was it who dared to raise his hand against my bride?" Duke Adelhart turned to Countess Barnain. The woman literally shuddered with fear and began to swear in a stuttering voice that she had not beaten her. At this time, Ibelia assured the Duke that her wound was not so serious. But Cassis did not want to listen to any excuses. He made his own conclusions about what was happening here. "I will not allow my future wife to be in such a place. From now on, the lady will live in my mansion," he said, not tolerating objections. Ibelia, who had not expected such a turn of events, only cried out in surprise. And the girl's surprise even increased after the man carefully but firmly took her hand. Walking towards the exit, Cassis did not let go of her hand for a second, leading the girl behind him. Lady Barnain and Duke Adelhart left the Barnain mansion. Thus, the man and woman found themselves in a carriage on the way to the Adelhart estate. Ibelia was unable to come to her senses immediately, but when she did, she indignantly asked the Duke what he was doing. "And you, young lady?" the man returned her question. She was being treated so terribly at home, so why did she ask for the engagement to be broken off instead of asking for help? To which the girl replied that it didn't matter how she was being treated there, and he shouldn't worry about it. "Or are you doing this to make me break off the engagement?" he asked the next question. And since that was the case, Duke Adelhart said that he would answer her about this today. Since they are engaged, the young lady belongs to him, so he cannot dissolve it. Besides, he thinks he has the right to interfere in her personal affairs, again for this reason. However, Ibelia was indignant at why he was acting so suddenly. "I already told you," the man repeated, leaning closer to her. "They are engaged, so she belongs to him." However, the girl did not understand. He did not want to marry her. Cassis had nothing to say to this, in fact. He himself did not understand the reasons for his actions. "I'm not going to force you, but for now, stay at the Adelhart mansion for a while," he finally answered, not looking at her. And when Ibelia asked why he was so worried, Cassis replied that anyone in his place would have done the same thing after seeing what the Barnain family did to her. Besides, he can't send his bride to another place, so it would be better if she lived in their mansion. Soon they returned to the Adelhart mansion, where no one was waiting for them. But still, the butler, together with all the servants, greeted Lady Ibelia. The butler introduced himself as the manager of the Adelhart mansion. The Duke said that the lady would stay here for some time, and asked that she be taken care of so that she would not want for anything. Following the master's order, the manager led the girl to her room, informing her that she would live there. He also invited the Adelhart family doctor to examine her wounds. Embarrassed, Ibelia tried to refuse any help. But even the doctor replied that this was the master's order, and he could not disobey it. The girl thought that if Cassis found out that she refused to be examined, she would get angry again. And she had to agree, even though she didn't want to at all. After examining and treating her wounds, the doctor bandaged the girl's wrist and finally everything was finished. "It must have been very painful for you. Do you have any other complaints?" the man asked sympathetically. To which the girl replied that she was now fine and had no more wounds, and the doctor was very glad to hear this, and added that if she needed anything, she should not hesitate to contact him. Finally, when the girl was left alone in the room, she was able to think about what she should do now. She doesn't know what kind of world is out there, so it's dangerous to leave here without a plan. She wanted to make money by collaborating with Samuel and get out of the Barnane mansion. All her hopes for such a development of events disappeared in an instant. Besides, if she left, would they be able to find a good mother for Lucius? That was what worried her. And the problem with the heir had not yet been resolved, which only added to the anxiety. And since she told Cassis about Lucius's father, she also needed to make sure that the curse would be lifted from him. But are such reasons enough for an unmarried woman to remain in a mansion where only a man and a child live? Her thoughts were interrupted by an insistent knock on the door, and the girl allowed her to enter. The door opened and Lucius appeared behind it, his look quite worried. "Lady Abelia, what happened to your cheek?" the boy asked anxiously. Having answered that nothing terrible had happened to her, the girl asked what the young gentleman was doing there. Lucius replied that he was going for a walk and would like her to come with him. The tone in which the young gentleman uttered his request made the lady very sad and made her heart soften a little. Realizing that the girl had been silent for too long, Lucius repeated his request, asking if she would like to go for a walk with him. "Okay, young master," the girl finally answered with a smile. It wasn't long before Abelia and the young master Adelhart were leisurely strolling through the green, blooming garden. Abelia was in a good mood, and she noticed everything around her with delight, especially focusing on such a plant as clover. Lucius, hearing this name, did not understand what she was talking about and thought that the lady meant hairgrass. Abelia explained that this plant usually has 3 leaves, but sometimes you come across a 4-leaf clover, and they say that if you find one, your deepest wish will come true. "Have you ever found a 4-leaf clover, Lady Abelia?" the boy asked her. To which the girl replied that no, although she tried several times, she still couldn't find it. Then the young gentleman asked what wish she would like to make, and the girl thought for a moment. But she didn't have time to answer, because the maid announced that dinner was ready and the young master and lady were expected at the table. Noticing that it was already late and the sun was beginning to set, Abelia suggested that the young gentleman go into the house. Lucius agreed, but as he left, he looked thoughtfully at that very clover, hoping to find a 4-leaf one. The dinner was, as always, magnificent, and everyone devoured the food with pleasure. But the atmosphere at the table was as gloomy as could be. Abelia even felt like she couldn't breathe. "Don't you like the food?" asked Cassis, to which the girl replied that everything was delicious, she just had no appetite. Lucius then asked his father if Lady Abelia would continue to live in the mansion, to which the man replied that nothing had been decided yet, but for now she would stay here. "Lady Abelia, is it true that if you find a 4-leaf clover, your wish will come true?" the boy asked breathlessly. Seeing his enthusiasm, the girl already regretted what she had told him. "Young master, these are just fairy tales. In fact, a 4-leaf clover does not grant wishes at all," said the lady, and asked Lucius not to look for it. This made the boy noticeably sad and silently bow his head. Standing by the window after dinner, Abelia noticed that it had started to rain quite heavily outside. And out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a shadow flashing in the garden, wondering who could be there in such weather. Not the gardener by any chance. But in the next moment, like a flash, realization came. Abelia ran into the garden as fast as she could, into the pouring rain, praying that she was wrong. "Lucius!" the girl screamed when she saw the boy lying on the ground. She tried to rouse the young gentleman, asking what he was doing here in such weather. "Really?" She didn't finish, finally realizing that she was to blame for everything. She asked him not to look for the clover from fairy tales. "Didn't I tell you that he doesn't grant wishes?" Abelia screamed, and bitter tears began to flow down the girl's cheeks. Exhausted by the search, Lucius tried to object, but his voice sounded quiet. "I found it." He held in his hands a green leaf with 4 petals. Despite being very tired, the boy smiled contentedly. The doctor, who arrived after examining him, said that if the young gentleman rested, the fever would go down by morning. Noticing that it was already late, Cassis suggested that the lady return to her room. "I want to stay with Lucius a little longer. Can I be alone with him?" Abelia asked in a quiet voice. Without answering, the Duke simply nodded silently, giving a sign to the servants. The girl spent the next few hours at the bedside of the child with a fever. "Nanny?" Lucius asked questioningly as he woke up, noticing the girl nearby. But Abelia replied that it was she and told him to continue sleeping peacefully. However, the boy only looked around restlessly, turning his head in different directions as if he was looking for something. "Young master, this is not what you are looking for." The girl handed him a 4-leaf clover. At first, Lucius was surprised, not believing that everything was really happening. And then he smiled happily. Thank God he didn't lose it. "I asked you not to look for it, it's just a plant, it won't fulfill your wish," the girl said, upset. But the boy noticed that she wanted to find it herself, and the girl realized with surprise that he had found it for her. "Yes, so make a wish," Lucius asked happily. However, his words made Abelia even more upset. What did she do? She doesn't deserve this, she's not worthy of love. "Why are you giving it to me?" the girl asked with tears in her eyes. And the boy replied that it was because he wanted her wish to come true, not his. But what is her wish? His words left Abelia stunned. In fact, her deepest desire is to have a family again. Little Seo Yoon's wish, which was shattered into pieces when she was still a child. But is it true? Does she really want to have a family again? Or is it just a need for love? Approaching the boy, she gently stroked his hair. There is only one way to fulfill their wishes with Lucius. On what business, the Duke asked without raising his eyes, but after he heard Abelia's voice, he asked what she wanted and suggested that she sit down. "So, what brings you to me?" Cassis asked as the girl settled down on the sofa opposite him. "Regarding the wedding you talked about, I agree to marry you," the girl said directly. Only in exchange for the information about Lucius's father, she asked to make a deal not with the father, but with her directly. When asked why she changed her mind, the girl replied that it was because of Lucius. And when the man asked what he had done, she replied that it was a secret that only she and the young master knew, adding that as soon as the Duke was convinced of the veracity of the information, she would like to divorce him. She had no doubt that Cassis would be able to lift the curse from Lucius. And she will bring Arya so that she can heal him completely, and all this will take 3 years. During this time, it will be possible to remove the curse from Lucius, and she will be able to prepare for an independent life. "I am so disgusting to you." Cassis's voice brought her out of her thoughts. Abelia stared at the man in shock, barely understanding the meaning of his words. Cassis repeated his question. Was he really that disgusting to her? Abelia sighed and explained that it wasn't that, she just wanted to marry for love. The Duke then asked her where she would go if they got divorced, to which the girl replied that she would think about it later. "So what do you say about divorce?" Abelia asked expectantly. And Cassis replied that he needed time to think it over, but he was willing to make a deal with her rather than with Count Barnain. In that case, the girl would like them to sign the contract. The Duke assured that his assistant would prepare the papers, but he would like to discuss the divorce later. Cassis considered their conversation over, but the girl, with all possible sincerity, asked that while they were married, she pay more attention to Lucius. "I'm already spending time with him," the man immediately replied. Looking down, the girl stated that he really thought so, but his actions said otherwise. Although the Duke says that he devotes time to his son, he himself was sitting at the documents while he was ill. Cassis noted that the doctor thought Lucius simply needed to rest and would not recover any faster if he was around. However, Abelia began to get angry when she heard such words from the boy's father. Right now, Lucius must be thinking that his father doesn't care about him and has abandoned him, but that's not true. In fact, the Duke is so worried that he can't even concentrate on work. Abelia thought it was a good offer for the Duke, but the man sincerely did not understand how to properly pay attention, which the girl promised to teach him. To begin with, she suggested putting the documents aside and going to Lucius, which the man did immediately after she left. But he paused slightly, remembering the recent words of the bride sitting in front of him. "You're so worried about Lucius that you can't even concentrate on your work." She seemed to look straight into his soul, pulling out even that which he himself did not realize. Cassis understood that Abelia was right about everything, but he was embarrassed by his own behavior. He acted impulsively after seeing her wounds, and it really would be better for them to divorce when the time came. But she said she hadn't planned anything yet, and where would she go after the divorce? Would she suddenly return to the Barneys again? But why the hell was he so worried about this woman? Lucius's nanny was very surprised to see the gentleman in the boy's room late at night. Cassis immediately made a sign with his hand to her not to wake the boy with the noise. "Sit down, the young gentleman was just waiting for you," the nanny said quietly with a smile. Then she wished the gentleman to rest and left him alone with his son. The woman left in a good mood and a little calmer, because Lucius remained in the caring hands of his father. The boy was sleeping peacefully, and Lucius moved closer to his bed. The man timidly extended his hand to the peaceful child, and then he took his small palm in his own and squeezed it lightly. This simple movement stirred up memories dear to his heart. "Cassis, give me your hand." He literally heard his sister's soft voice. Yes, that was the last time he held her hand. That day he swore to himself that he would protect this child. The baby in his arms smiled at him carefreely, grasping his finger with its small hand. Didn't he keep his promise? But then why is Lucius afraid of him? Maybe because they are father and son. While Cassis was wondering why Lady Abelia was speaking as if he had actually done something wrong, the boy woke up and opened his eyes with difficulty. Seeing his father nearby, he perked up and wanted to get up, but the Duke told him not to get up and to rest. "You came to me?" Lucius asked through embarrassment. And the Duke nodded affirmatively, confirming his words. The boy liked his answer very much, and he smiled happily, causing Cassis to look at him questioningly. "I'm glad you're here, father," the young gentleman replied sincerely. However, how can one be happy that his father simply came to the bed when he did nothing at all for him? "Sleep, it's late," said Cassis, and the boy happily obeyed. A few days later, Abelia was carefully studying the marriage contract. Including information about the family of Baron Barnan, she read to herself, and these words made her think. Why is there no clause about divorce in the contract? They of course agreed to discuss it later, but it is strange that it is not there at all. Cassis noted that it was precisely because they had agreed to discuss it later that he had not included it in the contract, but the girl insisted on this clause. "What shall we do?" The Duke's assistant intervened in their conversation when the gentleman and lady were unable to come to an agreement. "Add a clause stating that the terms of the divorce will be discussed later," Lady Barnain compromised. But Cassis remained stubbornly silent, causing both Lady Barnain and his own assistant to call out to the Duke questioningly. Finally, to the girl's delight, Duke Adelhart ordered his assistant to add this clause, which the servant immediately made a note of in the papers. "And I also left my maid Annie in Count Barnain's mansion. Is it possible to transfer her here?" the girl asked her assistant, and he promised to do everything possible. The assistant also said that it would take at least 3 months to prepare for the wedding, and during that time they would do everything the gentleman needed, and asked if the lady had any wishes. "Can we have a small wedding?" Abelia asked. To which the servant replied with embarrassment that it would be difficult, but the girl herself understood this because they needed to take care of the Adelhart's reputation. Then she decided not to interfere. Leaving the servants to do everything at their discretion, the assistant thanked for understanding and left. As soon as the young man left the room, Abelia asked Cassis if it was okay to speak now, and the Duke replied that he had cast a spell of silence on the room so that no one would hear them. "Then let's get straight to the point. You wanted to know who Lucius's father is," Abelia began. "He is Prince Lionel Session from the magical kingdom of Session." "Lionel Session?" Duke Adelhart repeated in a changed voice. He couldn't believe that this could be true. The girl thought that in the original Lionel was a womanizer, so it was not surprising that the Duke reacted that way. Lionel was the illegitimate son of the current King of Session, and either because of his resemblance to his father or because of an inferiority complex, he was constantly getting into trouble, which the king was extremely unhappy about. Therefore, the ruler of the Session decided to send his son to study at a magic academy. It was there that he met Julia, Cass's sister. Lionel was very kind to Julia and cherished her, but he hid their relationship, afraid that other people would start pestering her and hurt her. After all, he understood perfectly well that he was the illegitimate son of the king, and he would not be able to protect her from sharp tongues and evil people. And the only person who knew about their secret was Count Barnan. But this turned out to be not the biggest problem. Lionel developed the curse of the royal family of Sessia, and this same curse was passed on to Lucius later. The biggest mystery in the original novel was that Lionel knew about Julia's pregnancy, and he returned to Session to obtain permission to marry, but he never returned from there. Lionel was crazy about Julia, so why didn't he come back? The girl lamented that she never finished reading the novel. After listening to her story, Cassis intended to leave to find out more about it. When the Duke left, Abelia stretched tiredly and decided to visit Lucius. After all, now she will be able to give this boy the happiness he dreams of. In the corridor, the girl ran into a maid who was carrying a tray of food in her hands. "Is this food for Lucius?" Abelia asked her, and the maid answered in the affirmative. And then the lady wanted to take it to the boy herself, but the maid was scared because she couldn't allow the lady to do this. "It's okay, I really want to do this." The Duke's bride smiled sincerely. Taking the tray, the girl went into Lucius's room and asked how he was feeling. Lady Abelia, the young gentleman, at first surprised, soon became inexpressibly happy to see her. The girl asked if the young gentleman was hungry and said that she had brought him something to eat. And when Abelia, in response to his question whether she had eaten herself, replied that she would do so later, he suggested that she join him. "This is not possible. The chef tried hard and prepared the dish especially for you, so you must eat it all yourself. Then you will quickly recover and grow big and strong," the girl answered. The boy asked again if he ate everything. Would he become as tall as his father? Ibelia thought that Lucius seemed to be more attached to Cassis than she thought, and answered the boy that of course if he ate everything, he would become as tall and strong as the Duke. But when the boy began to devour the food at a tremendous speed, she asked him to eat more slowly. After finishing the meal, Lucius picked up a book that was lying nearby and said that he would like to give Lady Abelia something. The girl was genuinely surprised that the gift was intended specifically for her. Opening the book, the boy took out a 4-leaf clover lying between the leaves. He had found it for her sake after all. Ibelia was touched by the young master's action but shook her head. Her wish had already come true, so it was better for him to make his own. "Make a wish yourself," Lucius asked, puzzled, and the girl asked what he wanted. The boy hesitantly shifted the 4-leaf clover in his hands. "I want you to become my mother, but if you are against it," the child began, afraid to raise his eyes to the lady. However, Ibelia almost immediately replied that she agreed, which surprised him. "I will become your mother." The girl smiled dazzlingly, feeling warmth spreading through her soul. At first, Lucius couldn't believe what she said, but then the child's eyes filled with tears. He was so happy that he promised to try his best to be a good boy, to stop being capricious, and to study etiquette diligently. Seeing that the child had become completely soft, the girl tenderly extended her hands to Olia. "You don't have to be a good boy," the lady said, causing the child's eyes to widen in surprise. As Abelia hugged him, she told him that he deserved to be loved simply for existing. Lucius asked how she was, if she was happy to become his mother. "Of course I'm happy," Abelia asked, hugging the boy tighter. She is always happy when she is near him. Meanwhile, Duke Adelhart sat in the gloomy semi-darkness of his office, digesting the information he had received. Lionel Session, at the mention of this name, the man's fists clenched, and days gone by came flooding back to his memory. "Who is he, Julia? Why hasn't he returned yet?" Cassis was very indignant and worried about his sister. But she replied that he promised to return after he received permission to marry, and that his family was probably against their wedding, which is why he was delayed. The brother knew it was a lie. What family would not like the proposal to marry the Duchess of Adelhard? "This bastard knows you're pregnant," the young man asked, barely containing his anger. In response, Julia asked not to call him a scumbag, and added that he, of course, knew, and left for his homeland as soon as he found out about her pregnancy. They decided to name their daughter Lucia and their son Lucius. These beautiful names were invented by the child's father himself. "So please take care of our child until he comes back," the girl asked her younger brother with a happy smile. The future Duke Adelhart did not understand why his sister was still waiting for that man. And now, with the new information, he realized that all this time the father was the prince of the magical kingdom of Cessia, the same prince who was rumored to be a bastard and a headache for the royal family. How dare he? Cassis was angry and ordered Logan to gather all available information about the royal family of Cessia and Prince Lionel, and also to find out if Count Barnan and the royal family of Cessia were connected in any way. Having accepted the order, the assistant added that he would also prepare a letter for the Earl of Barnan and deal with the demands that the lady had put forward. Having finished his business, when it was already completely dark, Cassis slowly headed to the library. Moving unnoticed in the darkness, the man pulled on one of the books on the shelf. Right in front of him, a niche opened barely audibly, hiding a small room behind it. 7 years have passed since our last meeting, he said quietly into the void. Standing in front of a small object covered with a red cloth, he pulled the cover off it, thus freeing the portrait of a young, beautiful girl, smiling happily at the world. Standing in front of Julia's portrait, the man said that he had recently met someone who, like his sister, always hides her feelings and pain. And every time she tries to hide something from him, Cassis feels his world, which he so carefully protected, crumble. It's just an old and already healed scar, so why doesn't it give him peace? And also this woman, how can she smile so radiantly after everything she had to go through? What is really going on in Abelia's head? The next day at the Adelhart estate was the same as all the previous ones. What kind of place is this? This is my first time here, Lucius thought, finding himself in an unfamiliar room. And what caught his attention most was an object standing in the middle of the room and covered with a red cloth. Without a second thought, the boy took the fabric with both hands to satisfy his curiosity. The fabric fell to the floor with a slight rustle, revealing an amazing sight to his gaze. Right in front of him was a portrait of a young and very beautiful woman with snow-white hair and bright eyes. Who is this beautiful angel? Lucius, I'm going to look. Ibelia's voice echoed throughout the house a little earlier. The girl looked through all the corridors and rooms, looking for the hidden boy. Perhaps you are here, she called, entering the library. Lucius, meanwhile, sitting under the table, was glad that she would never find him. However, after looking around the room, Ibelia noticed that there was someone under the table. I wonder where Lucius is, the girl asked out loud, barely holding back her laughter. For the sake of appearances, she picked up books, pillows, and other objects, pretending to be looking for the boy. And then she fell silent and quietly crept up to the edge of the table. So you're here, the girl stated cheerfully, suddenly squatting down near the table right in front of the stunned Lucius. Ibelia said with a smile that she had found him again, which even upset the boy. No matter how much they play, the lady finds him easily time after time. He needs to find a new hiding place. Thinking about where he could hide this time, Lucius walked down the corridor. Suddenly his attention was drawn to a slightly open door. Looking inside, the boy did not recognize the place at all. He had never been here before. However, curiosity got the better of him, and he walked deeper into the room. He was especially interested in the object standing in the middle of the room and covered with a red cloth almost without thinking. The boy reached out to open it. Soon, Ibelia's games with the young master ended, and it was time for dinner. The girl asked if Lucius would like to take a walk in the garden after dinner, to which the boy said that this time he wanted to visit another place. The girl became interested in what kind of place this was. Maybe there were treasures hidden there. But the young gentleman replied with delight that it was not treasure, but that there was one room with a portrait, and an angel was painted on it. His words surprised the girl very much, and the boy added that he really wanted to show it to her. After dinner, they went together to this secret room. The boy immediately showed Ibelia the portrait. With his light hand, the red cloth was thrown to the floor, revealing a beautiful angel. As soon as Ibelia saw the portrait, she immediately realized that it depicted Julia Adelhard. Young sir, we have looked at the angel, and now it is time for us to return. The girl hurried to leave, realizing that if Cassis found them here, they would be in trouble. Lady Ibelia, my real mother is also so beautiful, the boy asked sadly. And Ibelia realized that this young gentleman was still just a child and missed his mother. She asked him directly if he wanted to see his mother, and Lucius was a little embarrassed, not knowing how to answer her. What are you doing here? The Duke's displeased voice came from behind them. Cassis asked how they found this place and looked quite displeased, which made Lucius try to justify himself by saying that he came here himself. Himself, the Duke asked again, becoming more and more angry and gloomy. The boy, defending the lady, made it clear that he himself had asked her to come here with him and asked her not to scold her, but his father had only told him never to enter here again. A frustrated Lucius silently agreed, feeling that he had done something unforgivable. Well, what story would you like to hear today? Ibelia asked, putting the young gentleman to bed. But Lucius was only interested in whether his father had scolded him very much because of their actions, and the girl realized that he was very worried about it. No, he's not angry, she answered the boy's question as kindly as possible. However, Lucius added that his father's voice was so scary that he was definitely angry. Ibelia herself also felt uneasy because of the Duke's tone, but this anger of Cassis was directed at himself. He failed to save his sister, so he feels guilty towards Lucius. He is not angry. He is just tired. The Duke has been working so much lately, the girl answered. And then she asked how about a story about a valiant knight before bed, and a slightly calmer Lucius happily agreed. He really wanted to hear this story, and the nanny said that his father was able to defeat even a dragon, like a knight. Of course you want to become like the Duke, young master? Ibelia asked him. After he answered in the affirmative, she asked if this meant that when he grew up, he would also go fight dragons. And then the boy thought about it. Dragons are really scary, the girl teased him, laughing at the fact that he took it so seriously. But Lucius replied that he was not afraid of dragons at all. It's just that if he becomes a knight, he wants to protect Lady Ibelia. And the girl asked in surprise what he meant. He promised to eat well so that he could grow up faster. And when I become as big as my father, I will definitely protect you, Lady Ibelia. The child smiled broadly. After his words, the girl fell silent, unable to utter a word. Slightly frightened by the prospects, Lucius began to say that if the evil dragon kidnapped the lady, he would drive him away, but almost immediately stopped short, because he noticed that tears were running down the girl's cheeks one after another, and he asked if he had done something wrong. "No, everything is fine, I'm just glad that you will protect me," Ibelia smiled. And the boy confirmed it again. He will soon become just as big and will always protect her. "Thank you, Lucius," the girl thanked him sincerely. At that moment, she was happy. The morning arrived as usual, bright and sunny, and the inhabitants of the house gathered at the table for breakfast, but Lucius was sad. Duke Adelhart was missing. "It seems that my father is angry with me after all." The boy became completely despondent. Ibelia tried to calm him down, saying that the Duke was simply busy and that Lucius shouldn't worry about him. But she herself felt that Cassis was deliberately avoiding her son, and she sincerely did not understand why. It's a shame there wasn't more information about Cassis in the original. In the original novel, Aria of Light, the story begins after Lucius has inherited the title of Duke. But by that time, Cassis Adelhart had already died, and all she knew was that Lucius considered him a strict father, and he also seemed to dislike Ibelia. The girl cannot even guess why Cassis is avoiding Lucius, but she was determined not to sit idly by for the sake of Lucius's happiness. And so, closer to the evening of that day, the girl stood resolutely near the Duke's study. She hesitated a little, gathering her courage, and then knocked on the door. As soon as the girl appeared in front of the Duke, the man asked her what had happened. "I wanted to talk about yesterday," the girl began. However, the Duke did not want to talk about it and flatly refused to discuss anything. Then Ibelia said that Lucius was very worried, to which the man retorted that she should not worry about it. "When we signed the contract, I asked you to pay more attention to Lucius," Ibelia reminded. But the Duke thought it was something else and stubbornly refused to listen to her. The girl tried to somehow get through to him but suddenly noticed something strange. And the Duke's expression was strange when she touched on this topic. Then Ibelia realized that Cassis was afraid that the secret of Lucius's origin would be revealed, but he could not run away from the truth forever. Lucius wants to know more about his real mother. Sooner or later he will have to hear the truth, Ibelia quietly noted. Cassis tried to pretend that he didn't understand what she was talking about, but the girl clarified what they both knew. "Why does he need to know about this?" The man clenched his fists, getting angrier and angrier. After all, he himself wants everything to remain a secret. However, Ibelia rightly noted that in this world, there are no secrets that are kept forever. In fact, she would also like Lucius to never know the truth. But, unfortunately, he finds out about this after Cassis's death. How will he react when he finds out the whole truth? That the one he thought was his father was not really his father. Unfortunately, Lucius felt hurt and angry. He also began to doubt Cassis' love when he learned the truth about his birth. The girl thought with regret that in the novel, Cassis could no longer explain anything to him. "Duke, it is better that Lucius learn the truth from you than that he learn it in some other way," Lady Barnon began. However, she didn't have time to finish speaking to her great surprise. Events unfolded rapidly. Duke Adelhart reached out his hands and grabbed the girl by the shoulders, shaking her at the same time. "Lucius, no matter what others say, is my son." He said the words loudly and roughly, but there was unbearable pain in his eyes. He wanted to figure it out himself and believed that it had nothing to do with their marriage contract. Lady Adelhart, his aunt, Ibelia understood the reasons for his behavior, but still thought it was better to tell at least part of the truth, and she added that it would be illogical to hide information about Julia from the boy. To avoid arousing suspicion, it's better to tell him at least something, she explained her words. Cassis, taken aback, ran his hand tiredly through his hair and asked why she was so worried about it. And the girl's answer that she, too, was an illegitimate child and knew what it was like to grow up without a mother made him feel guilty. "That's why I want to do everything in my power to make Lucius happy," Ibelia beamed. In fact, there was meaning in the girl's words, and Cassis understood it well. But he found it difficult to come to terms with this, and scenes from the past arose in his memory. "Lucius Adelhart," said Cassis, holding the baby in his arms, and explained to the nanny that this was the child's name. Looking at the peacefully sleeping little boy, the man repeated that he wanted to name him Lucius. And he couldn't help but smile happily, feeling how an unprecedented tenderness for this little bundle of joy was blossoming in his soul. Having finished his conversation with Ibelia, Cassis headed to Lucius's room. It was already quite late, and the boy was sleeping carefree. Cassis timidly extended his hand towards him, intending to stroke his head, but he did not dare. So Duke Adelhart stood next to his son's bed, amazed at such an amazing child. When Lucius was younger, he would often take the Duke's hand and look into his eyes. This child always longed for his father's love and showed it in every way. But Cassis felt that he had never lived up to his expectations and wondered if he had the right to call him his son. And does he have the right to deprive him of the opportunity to learn about his mother, who sincerely loved him? As much as he didn't want to admit it, what Ibelia said was true. Someday Lucius must know the truth. Cassis realized that the lady was right, and the boy would have to know the truth, but would he still smile at him when he heard it? At this time, the peacefully sleeping boy smiled in his sleep. He was dreaming of something good. Looking silently at Lucius without touching him, Cassis left the room. It was already well past midnight, and the bright moon illuminated the Duke's room. Exhausted by his experiences, Duke Adelhart slept soundly but restlessly. They burst into Duke Adelhart's office without knocking, but the head of the family showed no emotion. "What the hell is going on?" Cassis fumed as he stood in front of his father. The Duke was outraged by such unforgivable behavior. Had Cassis forgotten that it was his father in front of him? I asked Julia about the wound on her hand, and the young man was beside himself with rage. Saying that they were both still as worthless as ever, the head of the family replied that he was simply raising her because she had behaved stupidly, and these words made Cassis even more furious. Naturally, the father was dissatisfied with his son's behavior and looked at him carefully. Young Adelhart towered over the table where the Duke sat, looking like an angel of vengeance, his gaze expressing everything he was thinking. "How dare you look at me like that? The Duke was not going to tolerate such disrespect." And Cassis realized that he could do nothing in this situation, but he still did not intend to leave things as they were. "Father, if you raise your hand to her again," he began in a calm tone. Then, pausing, he placed his hands on the table and leaned towards his father. "I will not watch silently any longer." His gaze was full of determination. After some time, life on the estate went on as usual, but the life of the Adelhart family changed dramatically. The nanny rocked the crying baby in her arms, asking the young gentleman to calm down. At that moment, young Cassis approached them with a worried look. Seeing him, the woman said worriedly that the little gentleman was still not calming down. And indeed, from the fact that the baby had been crying heart-rendingly for a long time, his face had turned very red, but Cassis himself did not know how to calm the child. "Let me hold him," he finally said, holding out his hands. But the nanny doubted, because she knew that the young master himself had never dealt with such small children, and yet she handed over the baby with the instruction to support his head with one hand. Cassis looked tenderly at the baby, who instantly calmed down, and little Lucius immediately smiled happily, feeling that he was a kindred spirit. "Lucius Adelhart," the young gentleman suddenly said, and explained to the surprised nanny that this was the child's name. Smiling happily, Cassis Adelhart repeated again that he wanted to name him Lucius. The woman's heart calmed down, and she noticed that it was a very beautiful name, and Cassis added that this child is Julia's son, for whom she gave her life. "He must receive everything that is due to members of the Adelhart family," the man finished. The woman understood everything and agreed with the gentleman, saying that she was sure that the lady would wish the same. However, Cassis rightly reasoned that Lucius could not appear in this world as Julia's son, so there was only one way out. "I will call Lucius my son," he told the count, who at first did not understand who he was talking about. But when the son explained that he was talking about Julia's child, he instantly became angry. "How dare you!" Duke Adelhart's rage was so strong that he swung at his son. However, the blow did not follow. Cassis stopped it. "Father, mark my words. Lucius is my son and will be my heir," the young man said firmly. Yes, he did all this to protect Lucius. But why does this lady always say that he is wrong? Why does she constantly interfere in his affairs? And why is she looking at him with such a radiant smile, which he really wants to protect? So the night passed, full of reflection and memories, and the morning came. As Ibelia left her room, she ran into the Duke at the door. "Can you spare me some of your time?" the man asked. The girl's gaze did not escape his reddened eyes. Perhaps he had not slept well. Ibelia, of course, agreed to talk, and Cassis invited her to follow him. Leading her into a small room, Cassis pulled off the red cloth, and right in front of them stood that very portrait of Julia Adelhart. And Cassis, who had been silent until then, gathered his strength to pour out his soul. "I'm still not ready to tell Lucius about his mother. On the contrary, I want him to never know about it," the man began. Then he stopped and turned to look at the girl. "But you can tell him that she is his aunt," Cassis finished with a smile, and Ibelia froze, seeing for the first time that tender smile on his face. The man allows the boy to come here and look at her portrait whenever and as long as he wants, but the girl believed that he should tell Lucius about this himself. "Lucius is waiting for you to talk to him," she stated confidently. It was difficult for Cassis to decide on this, but he understood that she was right and it would be better this way. After some time, Lucius happily pulled Lady Abelia along with him. He was in a hurry to show the girl something amazing, and she only asked him not to run so fast. "This is Aunt Julia," the boy said enthusiastically, showing a portrait of a beautiful angel. He told me with shining eyes that his aunt was his father's sister, and the nanny said that she looked like an angel. Yes, she is very beautiful. Abelia was happy that he was happy. However, they were interrupted by a maid who informed them that the lady had a visitor waiting. "Countess Barnane has arrived," the maid announced, and the lady immediately tensed up. But almost immediately she said that she would not accept her and ordered that she be sent back, and in the future, if she came, not to report but simply to send her back. But she said that she would not give you the maid unless you came out to her. These words made Abelia wary. Then the girl turned to Lucius and said with a smile that she needed to leave for a while. She would be back quickly, before he could even blink. "Lady Abelia, don't go." The boy didn't want to let her go, and was worried when he saw her reaction to the uninvited visitor. Trying to calm him down, the girl stroked his hand, assuring him that she would be quick, and when she returned, they would walk in the garden and weave bracelets from clover. "Okay, I'll wait," the boy answered reluctantly and looked very sad. At this time, the Countess was raging in the living room, screaming that she was her mother and why she couldn't see her child, despite the servants' attempts to calm her down. "Who are you to call yourself my mother?" Abelia asked sternly as she descended the stairs. Seeing her, Countess Barnane could not contain the anger that immediately appeared on her face. "You don't have to bring any treats," the girl ordered the servants as she approached. "What a terrible way to treat guests," the woman said loudly and indignantly again. To which Abelia replied that rude women who burst in without an invitation could not be considered guests. "Okay, let's get down to business. Why did you come?" the girl asked, and the slightly discouraged countess said that she had not even invited them to the wedding and was not giving them a dowry. Did she really want to show in this way that she was breaking off relations with her family? The woman asked. "That's right," Abelia answered calmly, which again caused a wave of indignation that she had forgotten that it was the Count who insisted on this marriage. However, the girl retorted that she was ultimately engaged to Duke Adelhart, and after the wedding she will become a member of the Adelhart family, so why should she maintain contact with the Barnane family if there is no benefit from her? The Countess's beautiful face was once again distorted by disfiguring anger, and the woman literally choked with indignation. "Besides, you despised me for bearing the name Barnane, so be glad because I will soon stop doing so," she added clearly. And since she had nothing more to say, and she did not intend to continue the conversation, Abelia said goodbye. "Ungrateful brat," came the voice after her, and the girl froze. "Don't forget how mercifully we saved your worthless mother," the woman persisted. Abelia asked if she was threatening her and was going to harm her mother, to which the woman shouted that they expected gratitude from her for their kindness. Listening to these claims, Abelia thought with disgust at how she dared to threaten her family. Leave immediately, the girl was no longer going to tolerate such treatment. And also, "If you dare to touch my mother, I will not leave it so easily," Abelia warned. Countess Barnane could not believe that this brat dared to speak to her like that, and even threaten her. And the girl, after thinking a little, added something else. "It would be better if you obediently let Annie go." Having said this, Abelia left the living room. With mixed feelings, the girl slowly returned to her room. Having thought it over carefully, she realized that she couldn't sit back and that she needed to meet Samuel as soon as possible. Without wasting any time, the very next day she showed up at the merchant's. The young man immediately asked how she knew about the Talana flowers. After all, Arya's cough had noticeably decreased, but he was interested in how the girl had found out about this property of the flower. However, Abelia believed that what was more important now was that his sister was getting better, and Samuel agreed. "You seem to want to tell me something else." The girl changed the subject. And indeed, the head of the guild found out that the healer she was talking about lived in the north of the capital, but Lady Barnane was most interested in whether she would be able to meet her. The young man answered in the affirmative and offered to take the lady. He also exchanged her jewelry for money. With these words, he handed her a rectangular object with a tassel, informing her that it was her case bank token. "Why are you giving it to me?" Abelia wondered. To which Samuel replied that it included a fee for the information she provided. And when the girl asked again in surprise, he replied that it was payment for his sister's life. "But the token needs to have a name on it. May I know your name?" the young man asked with a stupid smile. The girl introduced herself as Abelia, and at that moment the token in her hands began to sparkle. Ibelia is a beautiful name, the man complimented, and the token emitted a particularly bright flash of light. Then a very relaxed Samuel revealed that he had put a spell on the token so that she would not have to worry about it being lost or stolen. Thank you, and forgive me for being so impudent, but I have one more request. I want to find one person again, the girl said. And when Samuel asked who they needed to find, Ibelia sadly replied that it was her mother. But it so happened that she had no information, and all she remembered about her was her pink hair. The guild leader noted that in this case the search could take a long time, but the girl added that it needed to be done as soon as possible. She must find her mother before Count Barnin does. Then Samuel asked if she had any more information. She is connected with Count Barnin, Ibelia answered sadly. 20 years ago, she worked for the family of Count Barnin, and he can start his search based on that. In addition, she can pay him with money, but as a token of gratitude, she will tell him something else. I also know a doctor who can cure your little sister, the girl answered with a smile. The excited young man immediately asked who it was and received the answer that it was the one they would soon meet. After some time, they arrived at a small house surrounded by greenery. The girl knocked gently on the door, asking if the owners were home, and the door creaked open quietly. Who's there? The red-haired girl with glasses asked timidly. There was a girl and a boy standing at the door, and the girl asked if she was Erin Lawner, causing the lady of the house to flinch in fear. I heard that a good healer lives here, so I immediately hurried here. I need your help, Ibelia said with a disarming smile. As a true doctor by vocation, Erin could not refuse those who needed help and invited them to come inside. Having seated the guests and poured them a cup of tea, she asked how she could help them. I'll try to put it briefly. I want to become your sponsor, the guest replied. She also wants to help her get the drug on the market and heard that she is looking for a sponsor. Erin confirmed that this was true, but most sponsors were worse than traders. They wanted to take the bulk of the profits for themselves. I'm so tired of this. I don't want to be a toy in the hands of aristocrats anymore, Erin said with great pain in her eyes. Ibelia herself understood that she was no different from those very aristocrats. After all, she also wants to become her sponsor for her own benefit. I understand that I will not tell you beautiful words and assure you that I am not like other aristocrats, but I can promise that I will respect your opinion, the girl said. Erin will be able to set the price for her medicine herself, and she will only be given 10%, and she will also never interfere in her affairs. Why do you trust me so much? The doctor was taken aback. Ibelia replied that one child really needed her help. I want you to help my little sister. The dark-haired guy sitting next to her joined the conversation. His sister was born very weak and has difficulty breathing. If she overexerts herself, they have given her the best heart medicine, but she is not getting better. Erin found it difficult to make a diagnosis based on his words alone, so she asked to examine the child. Ibelia intervened, saying that she would prepare everything necessary and wait for them at the Adelhard mansion. Thus, she could also maintain anonymity. And Samuel added that he would also introduce the lady to his sister. Ibelia wondering what little Arya was like. Probably as cute as Lucius. After negotiating with Erin Lawner, the young men headed back to town. Sitting in the carriage across from Samuel, Ibelia reflected that he loved his sister very much. However, he created the Sierra Guild in order to find a cure for her illness. I think Arya will be happy to see you, Samuel suggested, who had already returned to his appearance. And then he explained with a laugh that Arya was his younger sister. She doesn't often communicate with people because of her illness, so she is always happy to meet new people. The girl politely replied that she hoped so, but his next words surprised her. Besides, you are a very kind person, Samuel smiled dazzlingly. But after a moment, Ibelia's gaze dimmed. She didn't think that this was really the case. However, she must treat Arya very well. After all, the girl is Lucius's future lover. They soon arrived at the Denoa mansion, and the young man helped the lady out of the carriage. Inside the house, they were already met by the butler. The servant was very surprised at who arrived with the young master. She is my special guest, Samuel said, introducing Ibelia, and he added that the lady would visit Arya often, so it was worth taking care of her. However, in order to maintain some anonymity, he introduced the girl as Rose, and turning around, he promised to give her a bouquet of roses next time. They went up to the top floor and headed to the younger sister's room. Arya Denoa, Samuel's younger sister, looked at the people who had visited her in surprise. Seeing her brother, she immediately rushed into his arms. But the next moment, she instantly turned to Ibelia and asked who the lady was, which made the girl surprised at the girl's energy. Samuel hesitated a little, wondering how to introduce his companion. Hello, my name is Ibelia Barnain. The girl leaned towards the little girl with a smile. Upon hearing her name, Arya immediately said that she would call her Eve, and only then asked if she could call her sister Eve, to which Ibelia, slightly taken aback, agreed. "Are you my brother's girlfriend?" the little girl suddenly asked, causing both adults to freeze. Samuel asked in horror where she learned such a word, and the little girl answered that she read it in a book. Then the young man replied that you can't say such things to strangers. It's impolite. Then why did my sister come here, the little girl wondered. Squatting down in front of her, the older brother replied that she had come to take her to the doctor, and the little girl immediately became worried. She didn't want to go to the doctor. They were hurting her and constantly stuffing her with some nasty things. "This healer is a kind and sweet girl. She will not hurt you," Ibelia answered affectionately. And Arya asked again if this was true, if the healer really wasn't like that last grandfather. "Yes," Sister promises, Ibelia Barnain persuades her. Arya believed him. Rushing into the depths of the room, she said that she would go change clothes and asked to wait a little. Samuel meanwhile noticed that the lady was indeed very kind to the children, but the girl herself believed that she was simply doing her duty. "If everyone were like you, the world would be a wonderful place," Samuel said, smiling at her. Some doctors wanted to use Arya as a guinea pig, but he quickly stopped their attempts. After this, Arya began to be afraid of all doctors. To tell the truth, Samuel was still a little skeptical about the new doctor. But Ibelia noticed that Mrs. Lawner loved children and was very kind, so she would do everything possible to cure Arya. After some time, everyone gathered at the Adelhart estate. Erin examined her little patient with all the tenderness she could muster, and finding her pulse weak, she asked her brother what the other doctors had said. Samuel, in a different guise, replied that everyone had different versions, but most doctors agreed that she had weak bronchi. But Erin herself did not think that she was doing bronchi and asked if she had been given any medications recently. And after the answer that she was given a decoction of talon flowers, she was surprised to notice that they contained a lot of manna and asked if they helped. "Yes, it's the only medicine that has had any effect," Samuel replied. And Erin said in surprise that talana flowers are usually prescribed to young priests. "Okay, I understand. Give her a decoction of talon flowers if she feels unwell again," the doctor gave instructions, and she herself hurried to leave, since she needed to conduct additional tests, and later she would write a prescription. At that moment, the door to the living room opened and Lucius entered the room with a satisfied smile that Lady Ibelia had returned. However, only a moment later, the boy discovered that she was not alone in the room. "Sorry, I didn't know you had guests," the young gentleman said in fear. Ibelia said that it was nothing to worry about and suggested that we go in, introducing the guests as her friend Samuel and his younger sister Arya. "Hello, my name is Lucius Adelhart," the boy bowed politely and introduced himself. Arya immediately shortened his name to the short Lucy and asked how old he was, to which the surprised boy replied that he was 7. The girl was also 7 years old and she was surprised that they were the same age. Arya immediately decided that they could become friends. "Great, I like you, and besides, we are the same age, so be it, you can be my friend?" The little girl smiled. Young Adelhart, who had never had a single friend before, asked excitedly if she would really be his friend. And blushing, he said that he had never had any friends before. Lucius was a little embarrassed that he had no friends. At this time, the girl took a few steps towards him. Having informed him that it was a secret, she leaned over and whispered something in his ear. Hearing her words, Lucius was literally dumbfounded because she said that he was also her first friend. Since the Adelhart estate was still visited by guests, it was decided to organize a small tea party. Lucius handed Arya his favorite chocolate chip cookie. "These cookies are my favorite too. Try them," he insisted. Instead of taking the treat with her hand, Arya bit off a piece straight from Lucy's hand, surprising the boy. After chewing, she reported that it was indeed delicious. Samuel and Ibelia, who were watching from the side, were discussing how Arya seemed very happy to meet the young duke, and the young man asked if he could bring her here from time to time. Ibelia agreed, but noted that he did not have to come at all. He could only send Arya, to which Samuel replied that she was too cruel. Laughing that she was joking, the girl thought it was strange, but it was so easy for her to communicate with him, by the way. Since she became Ibelia Barnain, she had to laugh heartily. At that moment, another person entered the living room. I was informed that we had guests. Duke Adelhart appeared in the room. Upon seeing him, Samuel immediately took the ring off his finger, changing his appearance, and smilingly said that he had not seen Duke Adelhart for a long time. "Sir Denoa, what brings you here?" Cassis was surprised to see him next to his bride. Ibelia replied that she had invited him to perform one service. But the Duke was interested in what kind of service he had done, and the young man replied that he had simply helped the lady get home, asking not to misunderstand. "I see," replied the Duke. All this seemed strange to him, but he said nothing more. Ibelia noticed his strange look, but she didn't say anything else either. "I'm sorry I invited you over without your permission," the girl said, sensing the ambiguity of the situation. Cassis noted that she had no need to apologize, since the lady had already become a member of the Adelhard family, and she is free to do whatever she wants. Samuel, standing between them, felt very strange. Mentally, he wondered why there was such a strange atmosphere between them. He suddenly remembered, too cheerfully, that Arya had not yet greeted the Duke, and since they had already met, he needed to introduce her to everyone. Calling his little sister, he asked her to quickly say hello to the Duke. The little girl agreed and greeted his lordship according to all the rules. "Hello, my name is Arya Denoa." She made a small curtsy and appeared before Duke Adelhart. In response, Cassis nodded his head in greeting, looking in surprise at the smiling child. "Have fun. I still have a lot of things to do, so I'll go," he said, intending to leave the room. However, Ibelia managed to ask if Arya could come here more often, since Lucius liked her, to which Cassis replied that of course he trusted Sir Denoa and would tell the manager to take care of them. Then, having said goodbye, he finally left the room. As Ibelia watched him go, she thought that although he said that everything was fine, he looked somehow dissatisfied. And indeed, upon returning to his study, Duke Adelhart was literally radiating discontent. The assistant also noticed the change in the gentleman's mood, and thought that he was perhaps dissatisfied with the recent behavior of Countess Barnan, and he wanted to keep it a secret. But what can you do if he knows everything? And turned to the Duke. "They say that Countess Barnan came during the day and caused a scandal. Are you unhappy about this?" asked the assistant. Cassis then asked if Lady Barnan was all right, to which Logan replied that she had done well, and the Duke added that they must make sure that such a thing did not happen again. The Duke then noticed what kind of documents were there, and they turned out to be the materials of the investigation into the connection between the Earl of Barnan and the royal family of Session, which he had asked to collect. Recently, the demand for magical goods in the Empire has increased, so Count Barnan actively trades with the Kingdom of Sessia. This is probably why he became close to the royal family. Prince Lionel came to study at the Imperial Academy 14 years ago and returned to the kingdom 8 years ago, shortly before graduation. After this, he did not appear in public for about a year, and there are rumors that he was imprisoned. At that time, Count Barnan was visiting the Kingdom of Sessia. The imprisoned Prince Lionel and Count Barnan, who often visited the Kingdom of Sessia, it seemed that Lionel really was Lucius's father, Cassis thought. "That's not relevant, but," the assistant continued, and the Duke told him to continue. "It is said that during the year that Prince Lionel was imprisoned, his hair turned gray. He was of a strong build, but he lost a lot of weight and became like a living skeleton. People believe that he was tortured for attempting a coup d'etat, but since he was not executed, it may be just rumors." Imprisonment, Cassis thought. If it was true, then he simply could not return to Julia. "What else should I do?" asked the assistant, finishing his report. The Duke ordered to find out whether the royal family of Session was cursed, and also not to tell anyone about this investigation. "Ibelia has gone completely off the rails," Countess Barnan complained to your husband. "She kicked her out of the mansion, saying that she was an uninvited guest, and also demanded that her maid be returned to her. The woman was indignant. She demanded that her husband do something. Would he really dare to leave everything as it was?" Duke Adelhart's letter was somewhat strange. When they talked about the child's father, the advantage was on his side. The Duke so easily agreed to the engagement. So why did he suddenly change so much? It must be Ibelia's doing. The Count thought he raised her to be an obedient girl, but in the end he raised a tigress. "Of course I'm not going to leave everything as she did," he answered the Countess. "He always has a backup plan." The Count made a sign with his hand. A servant appeared at the master's call, ready to listen to the order. "Bring me the mother of that girl," Count Barnan ordered, referring to Ibelia's mother. A few days later at the Adelhart estate. "Arya, welcome," Lucius greeted his friend cheerfully. However, the girl said that she came not for him, but for her sister Eve, which made the girl smile. "Sorry for the inconvenience. Arya kept asking to visit you, and even threw tantrums about it." Samuel was embarrassed, to which Ibelia replied that everything was fine. Lucius was also really looking forward to her. After some thought, Lucius asked his friend why she called Lady Ibelia sister, and the girl replied that she just wanted to. "Can I call Lady Ibelia Eve too?" Lucius asked with puppy eyes. Ibelia, at first taken aback by such a sudden request, a second later smiled and gave him permission. Lucius blushed a little. The boy seemed to be extremely happy. Lady Eve, Lady Eve, Lady Eve, Lucius began to say. Arya immediately rushed at him, demanding that he stop and not make such noise. While the girl was watching the frolicking children with a laugh, Samuel asked if he could talk to her alone. While the children were playing in the garden, the young people were talking in the gazebo. Samuel reported that he had found the woman she had asked about. It turns out they lived in a small village located within the Viscounty of Owen. Owen, then, the girl thought. It seems the real Ibelia doesn't remember this place. However, she told Samuel that everything was correct and asked if he had managed to find her mother. Mom, the girl happily rushed towards the woman with the same pink hair as hers. The woman asked her dear Eve if she enjoyed playing with her friends and if she was hungry. So warm, she knows it's just a dream, created from the memories of the real Ibelia. She herself had never experienced such peace, and now she really doesn't want to wake up. However, sounds and someone's voice made her wake up. "Are you all right, madam? You must have had a nightmare," the maid asked, opening the curtains in the morning. And when Ibelia confirmed that this was indeed the case, the maid remarked that today was such a good day, so the mistress's mood would definitely improve. But before Ibelia had time to get out of bed, the butler knocked on the door with the message that the lady had a guest. But no matter how much they ask her, the woman refuses to answer the servant's questions about who she is and where she is from. However, she has pink hair. The servants tried their best to hold back the pink-haired woman who was rushing into the master's quarters. "Ibelia, Ibelia," she screamed loudly despite attempts to calm her down. "Everything is fine, let her in," the girl ordered, going down to the first floor. The woman immediately rushed towards her, calling her by name and her beloved daughter, stretching out her hands to her. She grabbed Ibelia's face in a sort of maternal tenderness. "How have you been all this time? You are the same as I remember you," cooed the guest. Ibelia asked why she had come, and she said that Count Barnane had told her that she was getting married soon, and that she had decided to move into this mansion before the wedding, which had upset him greatly. "Ibelia, my dear daughter." The woman seemed to feel genuine tenderness towards her. Hearing her mother's voice, the girl almost burst into tears. She immediately wanted to hug her and ask about everything, how she was doing, whether she had recovered from her illness, whether everything was okay with her. However, Ibelia slapped the woman's hand sharply, freeing herself from her grip. This woman is not who she claims to be, and I am now taken aback by her behavior. But her mother always called her Eve, so the girl asked again. "You really are my mother." Ibelia's eyes showed undisguised contempt. Playing to the end, the woman began to pretend to be indignant that she did not remember her mother at all, her mommy, who had not seen her for a long time, and even spread her arms in an attempt to hug her. But the lady already understood everything and only exhaled tiredly, and then called the butler. "This woman is pretending to be my mother. Send her to the capital prison," Ibelia ordered calmly. Fear was clearly visible in the stranger's eyes, but she reproached the girl until the very end for how she could speak to her mother like that. Even the butler doubted and asked the lady again if she was sure Ibelia was completely sure, because Samuel had already told her everything yesterday. Yesterday she heard that her mother died 14 years ago. When the girl first heard this, she couldn't believe it, because Count Barnane had promised to send a doctor. But what did Ibelia feel when she was told that Count Barnane had never done this? And she believed this man all her life, and believed that in this way she was helping her mother. "My mother died a long time ago," the girl answered the impudent stranger with disdain, to which the woman, already seized by the servants, hysterically screamed that she was simply following the orders of Count Barnane and loudly begged for mercy. Ignoring the screams, Ibelia ordered the butler to prepare the carriage. She intends to go immediately to the mansion of Count Barnane. Soon the Adelhart carriage was approaching the Barnane's mansion. Entering the house, Ibelia already knew how she would act. If he still refuses to give her Annie, she will be forced to take her by force. "Who is that there? Could it really be Ibelia herself?" was heard from the second floor. With his face twisted with anger, the brother asked how she dared to come here. He heard about how the girl treated the countess, how she dared to drive her away like an uninvited guest. "You have no conscience," the man raged. But Ibelia calmly replied that the countess was indeed an uninvited guest, and in general they always treated her like a stranger. "And at the same time you want me to be polite to you in return." The girl came up close to him and was not going to give in. She also warned her brother to be careful if he fell down the stairs again. Next time he wouldn't get away with a broken leg. "It's your fault. You think you can get away with it," the brother realized and pushed Ibelia hard. However, the girl took a step back and replied that it was none of her business, and he fell himself. "That's what I'm telling you, be careful." She later kicked him in the leg, and she reminded that in a few months she would become Duchess Adelhart. Therefore, he strongly advises him to behave decently. The maids of the barn and mansion were busy with housework near the mansion. Suddenly, someone called Annie's maid by name, and the girl turned around in surprise. Lady Abelia took the girl by the hand and pulled her along. To the surprised question of where, the lady replied that she would explain everything later. First, they needed to get to Duke Adelhart's mansion. Holding hands, two young girls, the mistress and her maid, hurriedly left the mansion. They quickly reached the carriage standing at the entrance. Ibelia persistently pushed Annie to get into the carriage, but she still doubted. "What's going on here?" Count Barnane's thunderous voice came from very close. Ibelia forced a smile on her face and noted that she hadn't seen him for a long time, and explained that she had come to pick up her maid, since it seemed the Count had forgotten about their agreement. "You came to pick up the maid without even greeting your father?" asked the Count. But the girl already understood what kind of person he was, and therefore only smiled. "And you are my father. Don't make me laugh, please. You have never treated me like a daughter," she answered coldly. "But if he insists, then she can say hello." The Count almost choked from such impudence. "Oh yes, thank you for the present. I mean the woman who pretended to be my mother," added Abelia, already turning around to get into the carriage. The Count asked in surprise what her words meant. Did she really not recognize her mother? The girl already understood everything about the personality of the man standing in front of her. And she answered quite calmly that 14 years ago he promised that if she moved in with them, he would send a doctor for her mother. The Count was about to answer that this was so, but to his surprise, the girl interrupted him, saying that he had not kept his promise. And Abelia learned about this from a reliable source, so even if he doesn't try to deny it, he didn't keep his promise, and she no longer has a reason to stay in their family. "Don't talk nonsense, you're my daughter," the man smiled stupidly, and the girl also smiled back, confident that she was right. "I have already said that you have never treated me as a daughter," Abelia repeated again in a tone that brooked no argument. She remembered the first days in this mansion, when the Count told her that if she wanted to become his daughter, she had to be a real lady. The girl, hoping that he would help her mother, obeyed without question. Thanks to this decision, she will be able to save her mother. At least by suffering a little, she will be able to help her, and when she grows up, she will definitely meet her. She used to live in hope, but now there is nothing keeping her in the barn and mansion, so she asks not to try to contact her in the future. After the girl finally left with her maid, the Count stood silently at the window. "How did she know about her mother's death?" the man asked angrily. If it weren't for this information, he could still manipulate her. Could this all be the work of Cassius Adelhart? But it's impossible. That cold-blooded bastard is not capable of such a thing, and he wouldn't risk it for Abelia. Then who, the Count wondered. No, now is not the time to think about that. The main problem now is that Abelia has escaped from his control, and she intends to run away to the Adelharts forever, so he must stop her. With these thoughts, Count Barnane rang the bell, calling a servant. "Yes, sir. What do you command?" The butler immediately appeared in the room. The Count ordered a letter to be sent to Catherine. He needs her to come to the capital urgently. If a chess piece no longer serves him well, he must replace it immediately. Moreover, there are many girls vying for the position of Duchess Adelhart. You can simply seat another, more obedient one. That same night, Abelia decided to take a walk in the Adelhart garden among the blooming rose bushes. Her thoughts did not give her peace. The real Abelia remembered everything, especially the scent of roses that came from her mother. "My daughter is so beautiful," the woman said with a tender smile. Now the girl tried her best to convince herself that these were not her memories. But why then are her eyes wet with tears? At that moment she felt a light breath of wind, and she turned around in surprise, noticing that she was not alone in the garden. Cassius Adelhart stood next to her, holding out his cloak to her. Saying that it was cold outside, the man threw it over the crying girl's shoulders. He didn't say or ask anything else, he just was next to her. A little earlier, an assistant approached the Duke to tell him the news. Cassius immediately thought that something had happened to Lady Barnane, and asked if the Countess had come again. The assistant immediately replied that no, but hesitated, not daring to speak further. Finally, he reported that he learned about what happened that afternoon. A woman came to the lady who pretended to be her mother, but she knew that her real mother had died long ago. Logan also told the Duke about the treaty that Count Barnane had made with Abelia 14 years ago. "So that's how it is, just like Lady Barnane is now?" Cassius asked with concern. And the assistant replied that the lady was refusing to eat and would not leave the room. The maids brought her food several times, but she always refused, and the assistant, to his great regret, could not help her in any way. That day, Cassius stayed up late in his office working on documents. Suddenly he heard footsteps in the corridor. The man immediately realized that it was Abelia, but where was she heading at such a late hour? So the Duke followed the girl into the garden and found her crying. Standing next to him, Ibelia thought that she should at least change her shoes since she had gone out into the garden in her house clothes. The man looked at her with understanding, guessing what she was feeling now. "My mother?" he began the conversation, although it was difficult for him to do so. He said that his mother died of fever 10 years ago. They invited many doctors, but no one could cure her. It was a strange conversation, however, that Cassis started, thought Ibelia. Why did he suddenly start talking about his mother? Maybe he found out from Logan about what happened during the day. Then he's probably just trying to comfort her, albeit completely ineptly. But no, she must be mistaken. He would not console her. After all, not long ago he despised Ibelia, but suddenly he shows concern like this. In fact, she would like it to be true. "Are you trying to comfort me?" she asked the Duke timidly. But the man didn't answer and looked away in shame. Then Ibelia added that it wasn't worth it. Everything was fine. She wasn't that upset. But still, she gently stroked the cape on her shoulders and, smiling softly, thanked him for his concern. She feels much better, and now she will be able to sleep, so she will go to the room. After wishing the Duke good night, Ibelia returned to the house, leaving Cassis alone in the garden. The man thoughtfully wondered why she was thanking him for such a simple consolation. This girl is so strong, independent, and reckless, but at the same time so fragile that he wants to protect her. Catching himself thinking this, the Duke opened his eyes in surprise. The fact that he thinks about her like that can only mean one thing. I want to protect her. This was a new thought and new feelings for the heartless Duke Adelhart. A few days later, Ibelia came to the head of the guild, Sierro, on business again. Samuel, who was running the tavern in another guise, immediately noticed the girl entering. You've come?" He greeted her as if he had been waiting for her, and he added that he knew in advance that she would pay him a visit very soon. "Please sit down, dear visitor." The young man placed a drink in front of her. Ibelia did so, thanking him, and Samuel asked if she was okay. And he asked whether what he said a few days ago had influenced her. The girl hesitated a little and replied that she was trying to come to her senses. She was a little prepared for this, so she wasn't very surprised. She was very ill and doctors doubted that she would survive, Ibelia said about her mother. But unfortunately, she did not know that Count Barnon had not sent a doctor at all. After listening to her, Samuel asked what the lady had come for today, and Ibelia replied that she wanted to find her mother's grave. The young man said nothing in response, just silently looking at the girl. And then he handed her a small envelope. Ibelia took it in surprise, guessing what was inside it. "Just in case, I found out where her grave is. It is located in the area where you lived before," explained the head of the guild. And while the girl looked at the envelope in her hands, tears welled up in her eyes. "Thank you very much. I always knew you were a reliable informant, but I didn't think you could handle it so quickly," she answered quietly. The young man reached out and gently wiped the tears from the girl's eyes. "We just give special attention to our VIP clients," Samuel said with a smile. A few days after visiting the tavern, Ibelia wanted to talk to the Duke. She asked him to spare her a few minutes as she wanted to talk about something. Come into the office, Cassis invited the girl, and he added that it was cold here in the corridor. Ibelia was surprised. As his speech sounded informal and not as cold as before, it seemed like they became a little closer. "So what did you want to tell me?" Cassis asked as the girl sat down on the sofa opposite him. Over a cup of tea, Ibelia announced that she wanted to hire one person as her personal physician. But Cassis asked if she had a reason for this. Perhaps she did not trust the Duke's doctor. "No, it's not that. There's just a doctor I want to support." The girl was afraid that she might be misunderstood. And she doesn't ask to hire her to work at the Adelhart estate. She just wants that girl to become her personal doctor, and since she will be visiting the mansion often, Ibelia would like to get the Duke's permission. The Duke was silent, and the girl thought that he would hardly agree right away. But if Aaron comes often, then Arya will also often visit the mansion. Lucius and Arya will be able to spend more time together, which will help their love blossom faster than in the original. Although it was rather selfish of her, Ibelia thought. "Okay, do as you see fit," Cassis replied after a short thought, to the girl's great surprise. She immediately thanked him and added that she wanted to go somewhere tomorrow. And for this, Cassis also gave her permission, telling her to do as she saw fit. Then Ibelia clarified that she wanted to leave for 2 days. "Where are you going?" the Duke asked. Ibelia explained that, as he had already heard from Logan, in the village where she had lived since childhood, there was her mother's grave, and she wanted to visit her. The Duke wanted to offer her to take the knights with her, but she immediately refused the escort, saying that she would go only with Annie. "You are the future mistress of the Adelhart family house," the man retorted. And in a tone that brooked no objection, he added that he would go with her. "What? No, it's better to send the knights with me." Ibelia immediately became frightened. "You find me so unpleasant?" the man asked sadly. Ibelia let out a tired sigh, replying that that was not the issue at all. Then Cassis again asked to be allowed to go with her. As her future husband, he wanted to fulfill his duty. The girl had no choice but to agree, but she thought that this was just a marriage of convenience, so why was he trying so hard? And so the day of this little trip came. As the girl finished getting ready, Lucius entered the room and asked permission to go with her. The girl replied that even though they would use the magic portal, the road would still be long, and the young gentleman might get tired. "But I also want to go for a walk with you and Dad," the boy said sadly. The girl looked at him carefully and made a decision. "Annie, please look after the young master," she asked the maid, and the boy perked up at her words. "Does this mean that he is also going?" And the girl confirmed this, because they have never gone for a walk together before. Lucius Adelhart, a boy of 7, was happier than he had ever been in his life. He quickly ran to his room to pack his things right away. Ibelia thought that perhaps such a chance would help her bring her and Cassis closer together. A little later, everyone sat down in their carriages. Sir Logan and Annie were already in the back carriage, and it was time for them to set off as well. An open magical portal was already waiting for them ahead. The horses pulled the carriage straight through it without any fear. Soon they arrived at the waypoint of their journey. There they had to transfer to another carriage to continue their journey. The journey was long, but the new horses pulled the carriage briskly, and only Ibelia, barely restraining herself, mentally asked why their carriage was shaking like a cart. "Isn't it hard for you to travel, young sir?" asked the girl, and the boy answered with a smile that he was having a lot of fun, and it wasn't hard at all. Ibelia was glad that he was having fun, but she herself had different feelings. She doesn't go to her real mother, but for some reason she feels very strange. Suddenly, the carriage wheel hit a stone, which shook it quite a bit. The girl, not expecting this, flew somewhere forward, but she was immediately grabbed by someone's strong hand. Saying that she was fine, the girl raised her head and realized that she was in the Duke's arms. It was the first time they looked at each other from such a close distance, and each of them thought that the other had such beautiful eyes. Cassis looked enchanted into Ibelia's beautiful eyes. Ibelia also couldn't take her eyes off the man's face. The young people, taken by surprise, froze in each other's arms for a few moments. Both of them blushed very deeply, but Cassis even more, especially after the girl's words. "You have such beautiful eyes." Ibelia couldn't help but voice her thoughts out loud. The man, like the girl, blushed deeply, feeling awkward, but was unable to say anything. "Lady Eve, are you all right?" Lucius asked worriedly, and the girl replied that she was fine, instantly returning to her place opposite the Duke. She apologized to him, saying that she didn't do it on purpose, but I still thought it wasn't that bad. Having caught herself with such an unusual thought, she tried to throw it out of her head and forget about everything. Duke Adelhart stared out the window, not daring to even look at Ibelia. The man's cheeks were flushed red, and he felt extremely embarrassed. They soon arrived at their destination and walked out into the street in complete silence. All three slowly approached the final resting place of Mother Ibelia. The girl felt such a huge, bright sadness, especially when looking at a simple gravestone with words of grief. Even if it's not her mother's grave, it still breaks her heart. Let her not be lonely or sad there. Let her be happy always. "Sir Logan, I would like to order a new monument for my mother's grave. Is that possible?" Ibelia asked, and the servant answered in the affirmative, adding that he would also hire a caretaker to look after it. Annie, meanwhile, was carefully wiping the dust off the gravestone. Looking at this, Ibelia thought that her mission was complete, but then something caught her attention. "Lady Eve, please accept this." Lucius sheepishly handed the girl a bouquet of wild flowers. She asked in surprise what they were, and the boy said that they were for her mother. It was only when Lucius handed her the flowers that she realized that all this time she had seen Ibelia's mother as her own family, whom she would never be able to meet, and that those who did not love her she still loves very much and keeps them in her heart. She sincerely thanked the boy for these flowers, and she decided to leave her last feelings with them to Ibelia's mother and her family, which exists somewhere. Tears rolled down the girl's cheeks now she could live on as Ibelia Adelhart. After visiting the grave, they all walked together along the seashore, over which the sunset was glowing red. Lucius shouted with delight that the water was so cold, and the girl explained that it was only the beginning of summer and one should not go too far into it. At this moment, Logan approached the gentleman with not very good news. The assistant managed to find only one room for the night, and these words left Cassis, and especially Ibelia, in a stupor. Logan explained that there were no other hotels there, so they asked about available rooms at the one they had, but there was only one. Wait, you mean to say that the 5 of us will sleep in one room? The girl was frightened by such a prospect. But the servant asked not to worry about them. He and Annie could sleep in the carriage or set up camp. It was no problem. The problem is that the 3 gentlemen will have to sleep in one room. So the Duke, Lucius, and I are in the same room? Ibelia asked with a dry voice, and Logan added sheepishly that there was also one bed. Very nervous, the girl said that she would rather spend the night with Annie at the camp, but Cassis immediately added that he would be sleeping at the camp. But sir, are you sure? Logan doubted, although Cassis himself showed no doubt. But Ibelia was very worried that he would have to bother himself so much, and the girl was sorry that it turned out this way. But there was nothing to be done. Night fell, and Ibelia and Lucius settled into the room. The boy slept soundly, tired from the long journey. Looking at him, the girl thought that he was probably very tired from the journey, and she was sorry that it turned out this way. She wonders how Annie and Cassie are doing, and if she's going too far by forcing him to sleep at the camp. He had not gone with her because he was burning with desire, and in fact he was here because of her. While thinking thus, she saw the Duke sitting by the fire. The fire crackled quietly in the night, illuminating a small patch of land. "Why are you here alone?" Ibelia asked, approaching Cassis. The man replied that the others had gone to get firewood and asked why she was not sleeping. Perhaps the room was uncomfortable. But when the girl replied that everything was wonderful and she just couldn't sleep, he looked down for a moment, and then he asked if she was okay, much to Ibelia's surprise. And the girl thought that she was right about him telling her about his mother to comfort her. At first he seemed to despise her, and in society he was considered heartless. But the fact that he brought her to his mansion, calling her his bride, says otherwise. And then he consoled her that day in the garden, acting kindly. And he even went with her today under the pretext of protection. All this was a conscious choice of Cassis. Looking at this, Ibelia realizes that Cassis is much kinder than he seems. "Thank you for asking," the girl replied with a dazzling smile. The man smiled slightly. He couldn't help but smile back at her smile. And at that moment, sitting by the fire, they both felt that something had begun to change in their relationship. After they returned from the trip, everything seemed to be fine. This can't be true. Ibelia had been lying in bed with a fever for several days. It looks like she caught a cold from the light sea breeze, but why is it only she and everyone else is fine? "You seem to be a little overtired, my lady," Aaron remarked when she was called in on the occasion. And Ibelia really did have a lot of work to do. It had been 3 weeks since she had woken up in this body, and during that time there had been a marriage contract and a contract with Samuel, and a fight with the Barnane family, and her head was spinning from all of it. Aaron added that the lady needed to get some proper rest, and so asked the young Duke, who had been with Eve the whole time, to leave the room and not come back until the lady was better, much to the boy's dismay. "You might get infected," the doctor tried to explain, but Lucius retorted that he was in good health and would not catch a cold. However, Aaron insisted that she would make sure that Lady Ibelia got enough rest, because then she would soon be able to recover and play with him again, and Lucius had to agree. "Then get well soon, Lady Eve," Lucius wished. Overcoming her weakness, the girl smiled and thanked him for his concern, promising to recover quickly. Meanwhile, the Duke and his assistant discussed the fact that His Majesty had again refused an audience, and that another way had to be found. And also, Mrs. Barnane is feeling ill. The doctor said that it looks like she caught a cold from the cold wind, the servant reported. The Duke asked her with concern how she was feeling, to which Logan replied that she was already feeling much better than she had been this morning. "Okay, you can go." Cassis dismissed the servant, and he himself thought only of Ibelia. It was just beginning to get dark. Ibelia was lying in bed, occasionally falling asleep. Opening her eyes, she looked at the clock, wondering how much time had passed and whether it was time to get up yet. Not yet fully awake, the girl noticed out of the corner of her eye that there was someone in the room. And this is definitely not the young master, because he is too tall. "Your Grace?" The girl jumped up, hearing Cassis's voice telling her to lie down and not get up. Feeling extremely awkward, the girl asked where Annie was and was told that the maid had gone out for a moment to fetch some water. Ibelia didn't know what else to say, so she just sat there in silence. "How are you feeling? They say you have a cold," the Duke broke the silence. But when Ibelia replied that everything was fine and the medicine was helping, the Duke placed his hand on her forehead to see for himself. "You have a fever," the man stated, noticing how she blushed. With great reluctance, he removed his hand from her forehead, later sliding it through her hair. "It's not me who has a fever, but your hands are cold, Your Highness," the girl replied. but the man didn't understand what she was talking about, and then Ibelia clarified that he was just off the street, and he had to agree. Then she asked what brought him to her room, and the man hesitated. Couldn't he just come like that? When Lucius was ill, you yourself told me to visit him, Cassis replied, blushing, trying to explain his visit. But Ibelia wondered why he remembered this now. Cassis, who was unable to express his feelings for Lucius, had to explain everything to Ibelia using his fingers. But since he suddenly started talking about it, does that mean he's worried about her now? Wait, you mean to say that you're worried about me? The girl asked, puzzled. After a short silence, Cassis recalled how he had said that his mother had died of a fever, and the girl realized that he came because he was worried that something might happen to her. It turns out the Duke has a sweet side too. Wait a minute, maybe she's just dizzy from a cold? Ibelia wondered. Had she really just caught herself thinking that Cassis had a sweet side? Although, to be honest, his concern was pleasant to her. And since we were talking about it, the girl asked what his mother, the previous Duchess, was like, since she would also have to take care of the duchy for the next 3 years. I don't have any special memories of my mother. She was very ill after I was born, Cassis replied. And the girl said that she was sorry that he couldn't spend more time with her. He must have been very sad. But she immediately stopped herself, deciding that her words had crossed the line of what was permitted. That is, I wanted to say, she tried to justify herself, but the man interrupted her. Cassis said he didn't know if he was sad when his mother died. He didn't cry. Usually people cry when they are sad, and that is why some pointed fingers at him, saying that he was insensitive, since he did not shed a tear when his parents died. And then he addressed the girl by name, and hearing his voice, she was surprised. Tell me, do I seem like a monster to you? Asked Cassis. The look of this strong man was so sad that the girl was confused. And having answered that not at all, she thought that Cassis was not at all insensitive just because he could not cry. Everyone expresses their feelings differently, she explained with a smile. Therefore, the absence of tears does not mean the absence of sadness, because Cassis simply finds it difficult to show his emotions. To achieve the title of Duke, he suppressed his feelings and even grief. But this makes her want to know more about him, to understand how little Cassis grew up. What kind of life did he live, and what did he feel while walking through this life? She wants to know the very soul of this strong and kind man. Finally, the Duke hurried away, saying that he had taken up too much of her time. Ibelia bid his lordship good night affectionately, and the man wished the same to the girl in return. However, when he had already taken a step towards the exit, Ibelia stopped Cassis, taking him by the hand. Feeling this gentle touch, the man froze. Thank you for worrying about me, the girl said sincerely. Good night to you, she said, smiling tenderly. Cassis Adelhart managed to leave the room with great difficulty and walked along the corridor on weak legs. His hands were shaking nervously. He understood that something was happening. After all, this is the first time he looks at a girl with these seething feelings in his chest. When she came to break off the engagement, he felt nothing of the same for her. But today, her beauty captivated her. The memory of this beautiful girl with a dazzling smile made the man blush. After Ibelia recovered, Arya and Lucius came to visit them. The boy hesitantly greeted the little girl when he noticed her in the hallway, and he asked how she was doing, to which Arya began to answer quite calmly. But then her voice rose to a scream and she said that everything was just terrible for her. I was sick, the girl complained, tightly clutching her teddy bear. Hearing this, Ibelia turned to Samuel with concern, but he explained that she only had a slight cold and there was no need to worry. That's right. Nothing terrible happened, but they still wouldn't let me go out, even though I felt great and wanted to see Eve. Arya was indignant. And when her brother explained that he was worried about her, she called him mean, which wounded Samuel to the very heart. It's good that you've recovered, but let Aaron examine you just in case. Ibelia was still worried. And soon the doctor was already at the estate and examining the girl. She noted that everything was fine with Arya. She even became healthier than last time. It seems that the Talana flowers really help. Hearing about the medicine, the girl was again indignant that the tea was terribly disgusting, very disgusting. But her brother forced her to drink it, and Samuel had to admit it. Now that you are well, can we play in the garden? Lucius asked, and the girl happily agreed. This made the boy incredibly happy, because he missed his friend very much. And the children instantly ran out into the street. Ibelia barely had time to tell them to be careful. Then turning to Samuel, she added how glad she was that the Talana flowers had helped, and he noted that it was all her doing. The young man was about to leave, as he was not very comfortable being here. At first, Ibelia did not understand, but soon it dawned on her that it really was not very good if the future Duchess was alone with a strange man. Then I'll send a carriage for Arya later, the young man added, and the girl was surprised that he didn't come himself. Smiling dazzlingly, Samuel asked if the lady was disappointed that he was not coming. But Ibelia answered seriously that this was not so, which made the young man try to turn everything into a joke. In any case, he had a lot of things to do today, so Samuel said goodbye to Lady Ibelia. Then the guild leader turned to leave the room and was dumbfounded. Duke Adelhart stood before him like a wild wolf, glaring at him with a dark gaze. "Ah, your highness, you returned early," the girl noted, and Cassis confirmed that he had finished his business earlier than he had planned. The girl said that Lucius was in the garden with Arya, but Cassis did not take his eyes off Samuel. "Your highness, it's been a long time since we've seen each other. I was just about to leave." The young man began to stutter. And then quickly shouting, "See you later," he rushed towards the exit. Ibelia thought he felt awkward around the Duke. "You and Sir Samuel," Cassis began to the girl's surprise, but he never asked his question, saying that they would see each other at dinner. Ibelia stood there in bewilderment, watching the Duke leave. Maybe she misheard, but it seemed like he wanted to say something about Samuel. It has been a month since Ibelia arrived at the Adelhart family estate. There are 2 months left until the wedding, and Logan seems to be very busy with preparations. "Would you like Madame Olette to make your dress?" the servant asked. Madame Olette is a famous fashion designer from the capital, famous for her wedding dresses. All noble ladies dream of a dress from Madame Olette. Ibelia saw no reason to refuse the services of the most famous fashion designer of the capital, and therefore asked to contact her. But Logan had one more important question, and the girl was ready to listen to it. "How do you plan to walk down the aisle? Traditionally, you must be accompanied by Count Barnan," his servant asked. And Ibelia wondered indeed how she was going to do this. In this world, as in Korea, the bride is walked down the aisle by her father. But she had broken all ties with Count Barnan. Logan suggested that the gentleman do it, and his suggestion seemed the most reasonable. But will she be able to withstand this awkwardness? They will most likely look like robots. It's scary to even imagine. Ibelia thought hard, but soon a wonderful idea came to her mind. "Logan, I have an idea," Lady Barnan said excitedly. Having invited Lucius to a small tea party, the girl asked the boy a question, surprising him. "Could you please walk me down the aisle?" she suggested. The young gentleman asked again in surprise how that was possible, and she explained that he simply needed to take her hand and lead her to the altar. Considering her idea to be brilliant, Ibelia was glad that she would not have to take Cassis by the hand. There are also rumors in society that when Duchess Adelhart gives birth to a child, Lucius's position will be shaken. But he is the heir no matter what others say. If Lucius walks her down the aisle, everyone will know that they recognize him as their heir. "May I take Lady Eve's hand?" Lucius suddenly doubted. Ibelia was taken aback, not understanding what he meant. "I'm a bastard," the boy added in a low voice. "Young master, why did you say that?" His words made the girl wary, and she asked the boy to never say that again, because he is the only heir in the Adelhart family, and no one dares to dispute this. Impressed by her words, Lucius looked up in surprise. "Yes, I'm sorry, Lady Eve," he replied with an embarrassed smile. Ibelia didn't understand why Lucius was still upset about being born illegitimately. She had heard that Margaret, the young master's nurse, had driven away anyone who dared to insult Lucius. And after her arrival, no other lady dared to come here to become Cassis's wife, and she thought that discrimination was over. But now he looks even more depressed than when they first met, so she asks Lucius how his training went, and the boy replies that it was fun. But when Ibelia asked what he had studied today, he feigned that it was a secret, but the girl noticed a bruise on his arm under his shirt. This discovery and the child's strange behavior made the girl wary. Then Ibelia called Annie and whispered to her to fulfill her request. Soon they finished eating, and the boy said that he was full. Then Ibelia's maid asked if the master wanted more milk, and the boy did. "Okay then," the maid stepped forward to pour the milk, but at that moment she stumbled and spilled the drink right on the young master. "Your Grace, forgive me, let's go quickly. You need to change urgently. I'll help you." Annie worried while the lady calmly drank tea. Soon the maid returned and excitedly reported that the mistress was right. "The young gentleman has a wound on his hand," the girl worried, and she added with horror that it looked like a mark from a blow. "The mark of a blow," Ibelia repeated, still not believing it, but suspicions crept into her head. Who dared to hit Lucius, even if he is a bastard? The servants have no right to touch him. 2 suspects remain, Cassis and Margaret. But Cassis dotes on Lucius, he would never hit him, so there is only one thing left. What about his nanny? "It's strange that she didn't notice his bruises before," she asked Annie. But after the girl answered that the young master was being dressed by his personal maid, she was very surprised. The personal maid's name is Jo Markra. She is from the Markra family, who have served the Adelharts for many years, and is said to be the niece of Alex Markra, the young master's fencing teacher. Alex Markra, I see, the lady said thoughtfully. Lucius Adelhart fell again, struck down by his teacher. Stand up, young master, the man ordered, despite the fact that the boy was completely exhausted. The old man asked how he was going to become the heir with such a weak body. Stand up and take the sword, the lesson is not over yet, the teacher was adamant. Annie, when is Lucius's next fencing lesson? Ibelia asked, wanting to prove the bastard's guilt by taking the Duke there so he could see it with his own eyes. But it turned out that it would be the day after tomorrow, and that day the Duke had a meeting with high-ranking officials scheduled, and it would be difficult to bring him. In this case, nothing could be done, and the lady decided to sort everything out herself. The wooden swords clashed with great force, producing a deafening sound. Your stance is terrible, Your Grace. The grown man loomed over Lucius, quickly wielding a wooden sword. Eventually, from a particularly strong blow, the sword slipped from his hands and the boy found himself on the ground. The Duke, at your age, has already mastered all the basics. The words sounded too harsh. The man was puzzled as to how a bastard like this boy could become the heir of the Adelhart family. It was simply absurd. And this boy, the heir of the Duke, the teacher experienced a feeling similar to disgust. Being so weak, you will not be able to achieve anything, he told the child. The teacher thought that he would only tarnish the reputation of his best creation, Mr. Cassis. Lucius, being just a 7-year-old boy, could not hold back tears of resentment and shame. The teacher said it was time to end the lesson, and asked again what his lordship should do with what he had learned in the lesson. The boy meekly replied that he would never tell anyone, and the old man repeated again that it was a secret technique passed down only within the Adelhart family, so he should not tell anyone about it. The young gentleman cringed at these words and repeated again, "Yes, teacher. I'm even afraid to imagine what will happen to the Adelhart family. That must be why the late Duke was against bastards." The old man seemed to spit out every word with hatred. And he added that it must be very difficult for Mrs. Barnon to see the young gentleman as such a weakling. At that moment, Lucius Adelhart felt so weak, lonely, and helpless. "Who's there?" Teacher Markra asked suspiciously, hearing footsteps. It was Lady Barnane who greeted Lucius's teacher with a smile. And then the girl said that she wanted to talk to him, but they were not in the training room, although it was now time for classes and she had to look for them. "Do you have secret training?" she asked, noting that he was not shy in his expressions and their sparring was too brutal. The man did not understand what was happening, and he told the lady about it. Then Ibelia suggested calling it an open lesson, since the young master doesn't talk about his training. The teacher retorted that sparring was an integral part of training, and rudeness was a way of motivation. Besides, his lessons only concerned knights, and a gentle young lady should not interfere with this. Ibelia immediately realized that the old man had decided to get out of trouble in this way. But the man continued to say that fencing required adaptation to different conditions, so they often changed their training location, and her suspicions were unpleasant to him, and he would report this to the Duke. "In that case, you yourself will not be well, Sir Markra," the girl replied. After all, the young gentleman's entire body is covered in bruises, and does he really think that the Duke will ignore this? Bruises are a common occurrence in knight training. The Duke himself had gone through it, so he understands everything. The man began to get angry, not understanding why the lady had brought up this topic. Ibelia replied that she had no complaints against the teacher. She simply wanted to tell the Duke what he was doing with the young master. However, in response to her words, Sir Markra only grinned, and the girl wondered why he was so calm. Coming close to the lady, the man said threateningly that the Duke would rather believe him, a man who had faithfully served the Adelhart family for many years, than an unknown girl. "I wonder who he'll throw out," he asked, completely confident that he was right. "Let's make a bet, it will be funny," the man said. And then he left without even saying goodbye to the lady. Ibelia only clenched her fists in impotent rage, considering him a scoundrel. The sun was setting, and it was only towards evening that the Duke returned home. A deafening knock was heard in the estate. Someone was banging on one of the doors with all their might. The surprised Cassis opened the door and, seeing Ibelia on the threshold, barely had time to ask what had happened. It happened, and how it happened. The girl literally radiated rage. The Duke saw the girl in such excitement for the first time, and was literally taken aback. Having calmed down a bit, the girl still excitedly asked to change the young master's fencing teacher. And when Cassis asked if she meant Alex Marker, she got angry again, shouting that it was this idiot. "He's bullying the young master, using training as an excuse to make fun of him," the girl explained sadly. Cassis couldn't believe it, because Lucius said he liked training. And during the open lessons, the Duke did not notice any problems, because Lucius, on the contrary, smiled and happily practiced fencing. "This is all a game of Sir Markra, he is only pretending. Sir Markra forbade the young master to talk about training." Ibelia was indignant. But when the girl said that the boy had bruises on his arms, Cassis began to believe her. Just recently, the Duke called his son to him and asked how his fencing training was going, if everything was okay. The boy hesitated and hid his hands behind his back, and then with a fake smile replied that everything was fine and he liked it. Cassis wondered why Lucius hadn't said anything, why he hadn't asked for help. The man clenched his fists. He was beginning to understand what was happening. "You can go," he said sternly to Ibelia, and she was taken aback by his tone. Cassis said that he heard her and would deal with it himself, and she could go. Stepping out into the corridor, Ibelia paused thoughtfully, wondering if he had understood her correctly. Duke Adelhart sat in the semi-dark cabin in complete silence. A few years ago, Sir Markra stood on his knees before him, begging for another chance. "And he will make a true master of the sword out of the young master, in whose veins flows noble blood. Does it matter that he is a bastard as long as he bears the name Adelhart?" so said Markra. "Alex Markra, you pathetic worm, you dared to play with me." Duke Adelhart was beside himself with rage. The dull sound of crossed wooden swords echoed across the training ground. Markra's teacher stood to the side, watching the knights train. At some point, the man turned his head and saw the Duke approaching him. "Welcome, Your Highness. What happened?" he asked. Cassis said he heard there was a conflict between him and Lady Barnane. Alex Markra smiled smugly. He had been expecting this. "It seems she did not like my teaching methods, and the Duke himself understands how gentle ladies are," the man said. "This is far from being for them," he chuckled, confident that he was right. Cassis then asked if it was true that he had called Lucius a bastard, to which the teacher replied that it was a misunderstanding. "A misunderstanding," the Duke repeated, his eyes blazing with rage. The teacher assured that he had not said such a thing. Perhaps the lady had misunderstood his words when he said that even a bastard could achieve a lot. "I see," Cassis said, simultaneously picking up the training sword. Taking a stance, the Duke took the sword with both hands, as he had once been taught. Suddenly his hands began to tremble, and memories of him as a boy holding a sword like this, his hands shaking, came flooding back. "And with such skills, you are going to become the heir of the Adelhart family. Don't cry, why are you whining? Weaklings are good for nothing," his teacher admonished him. These words haunted him in nightmares for a long time, as did the image of the teacher. "I haven't fought with you for a long time," he told Marker. He was no longer that weak boy. He was the first to strike a swift blow at his teacher. "You have become stronger, your lordship," the old man defended himself with a smile. But Cassis did not share his good mood and only grew gloomier with each passing minute. After several series of accurately executed strikes, the teacher made a mistake. And the next moment the sword was knocked out of his hands, and Markra's teacher himself sat on the ground, disarmed, with Cassis towering over him. "Alex Markra, leave the capital immediately," Cassis pointed his sword at the old man. The man tried to object that it was unfair to him. Cassis added that if he saw him again at the Adelhart estate, he should blame himself. "You know the reason?" The Duke was adamant, asking if he had made himself clear. That evening, as Ibelia prepared for bed, she thought that Cassis was indeed worried about what had happened, and she wondered whether she should talk to him herself. Hearing a knock on the door, the girl decided to open it herself. And I saw Cassis, surprised and red as a tomato. But the man couldn't even answer the question of what happened, as his gaze fell on the bride's revealing nightgown. Ibelia didn't understand why the man was acting like this until the Duke told her about her nightgown. "Ah, excuse me, I was just about to go to bed, come in." Ibelia wrapped herself up and stepped aside, inviting the Duke. The man tried to say that he would come tomorrow, but Ibelia, with a smile that made him blush even more, said that it was inappropriate to send him away, since he had already come. "Come in, don't be shy." She took the man by the hand and pulled him into the room. Sitting down, Cassis said that he had fired Sir Marker and would now teach Lucius fencing himself. And he just wanted to tell her about it, since she was worried, for which Ibelia thanked him. The girl realized that Cassis was really worried. He loved Lucius much more than she thought. "Sir Markra is a member of an influential family, and he is an excellent swordsman, but I was foolish to believe his promises to change," the man noted with a sigh. Ibelia asked in surprise if he too had been subjected to similar treatment by Sir Marker. And what was the previous Duke doing while this was happening? The girl was sincerely indignant, surprising him with her ardor. She looked like a mad demon, and Cassis honestly didn't understand why she was so angry. And Ibelia didn't understand how she could not be angry. What Sir Markra did was simply terrible, and the previous Duke who saw all this was also to blame. And she asked if everything was okay with him, but the man did not understand what she was talking about. "I am very worried about you, Duke. It must have been difficult for you even to see Sir Markra today," she added, explaining that this was why she wanted to know how he was feeling. Touched by such attention, the Duke still could not reveal his feelings. Ibelia understood that it was not easy for him to fire Markra. Cassis is an honest man. He was simply trying his best to carry out his father's orders, and did not even suspect that this was violence. He was never able to get rid of the injuries and pain he received, but he still overcame it just for Lucius's sake. Ibelia understood his feelings and really wanted to support him. "Your Grace, you can tell me if you are having a hard time. You don't have to pretend to be strong in front of me," she said. "And if he wants to cry, he can cry." She took the man's hand and stroked it gently, calming and supporting him. He can always rely on her because she is his future wife. He saved her from the Barnane family, so now he must let her save him. Cassis listened with a completely bewildered look as Ibelia said that he was already fulfilling his marital duty, and she, too, must fulfill hers. That is what husband and wife do. The man sat silently, digesting her words. Fearing that she had crossed the line, Ibelia began to repeat that they were, of course, not a real husband and wife, and it was unknown how long this marriage would last. However, the man interrupted her flow of words and squeezed the girl's hand in response. He asked again if she had really said that he could cry if he wanted to. "So I can come to you whenever I want to cry?" Cassis asked seriously. Ibelia looked at him with wide eyes, and then she replied with a smile that, of course, at any time. The man was deeply touched. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. "Then I can cry a little now." The Duke was overwhelmed with barely restrained emotions. Realizing that it was serious, the girl intertwined their hands more tightly, supporting the man. Of course, Ibelia smiled happily. Only that day, Cassis Adelhart did not cry at all. He just looked into his bride's eyes for a long, long time, without taking her eyes off him and forbidding him to let go of his hand. Life at the Adelhart estate returned to normal. One sunny, slightly cloudy day, Ibelia walked leisurely through the estate grounds. "Lady Eve," Lucius called out to her with a smile as soon as he saw the lady. The girl brought the young gentleman some lemonade, assuming that he was hot. Lucius happily tasted the drink, and Ibelia looked at the boy with a smile. Sitting down next to him in the shade of a tree, she thought that it really was very hot today, but she lost her train of thought. Because not far from them, languishing from the heat and therefore stripped to the waist, the knights were training. It was very hot. Ibelia herself had turned red, but not at all from the heat. The Duke, who was also standing next to the knights, noticed the girl's interest and made a sign to the knights with his hand. Obeying the master's unspoken order, the young men immediately threw on their shirts. Lucius noticed that the lady had blushed and assumed it was from the heat, but the girl thought that she seemed to have been noticed when she was staring at the knights. Trying to change the subject, Ibelia said that the young master had never responded to her proposal. Lucius couldn't understand what she meant. "Will you lead me to the altar?" The girl repeated her question. And then he remembered, delighted by such an offer. The boy beamed like a bright sun and replied that he would be happy to. Meanwhile, Ibelia noticed someone at the training grounds other than the knights. Several people were approaching them directly. Duke Adelhart introduced the approaching girl to Ibelia as Nikita, saying that she would be her bodyguard. Ibelia greeted her politely, but asked why she needed a bodyguard, since she spent all her time at the estate. Cassie replied that she would definitely need it, and Nikita added that the lady would have to participate in social events. Ibelia completely forgot about social events. She decided that as soon as the wedding took place and she became a duchess, her mission would be accomplished. Thinking that she needed to properly prepare for social life, the girl invited the young gentleman to go to lunch. After finishing the fencing lesson, Ibelia, accompanied by Lucius and a bodyguard, headed to the dining hall. "Knight Nikita, I have a question," the lady asked casually. Pretending to be barely interested, Ibelia asked what the Duke had said to the knights there on the parade ground, and the bodyguard immediately replied that the Duke had ordered them to put on clothes. He probably didn't want the lady to look at half-naked men, which made Ibelia startle. It turns out that it happened because of her. But why? Cassis doesn't care what she does. They are just contract partners. And the girl decided that he was probably embarrassed by rumors that their marriage was not for love, and although there was nothing she could do now, all she could do was play along with Cassis. Lunch at the Adelhart estate that day was very interesting. Lucius sat with his mouth open, forgetting to eat, because Nikita was telling interesting stories. There is a legend about a mysterious power in the royal family of Sesia. Those who possessed this power could control huge dragons or transform into animals such as wolves. Lucius was delighted, and Abelia thought that if such a mysterious power really belonged to the royal family of Sesia, then perhaps it was somehow connected with Lucius's curse. But she is confused by the fact that a curse and a mysterious power are completely different things. The curse is rarely referred to as a mysterious force, and if she had read the entire novel, she might have found a way to lift it. Abelia asked Nikita if there were any cases of hereditary diseases in the royal family, but the knight replied that she did not know about it. But even if there were, no one would know about it. After all, something like this could become a weakness in the eyes of other countries, and Abelia had to admit that it made sense, but she couldn't just forget about Lucius's curse. It would be much easier to ask Samuel, but he would most likely pester her with questions if she asked him. Looks like she'll have to figure this out on her own. The first thing Abelia did to get answers was go to the library, and now she was surprised at how big it was. While looking at the books, the girl heard someone else enter the library. It turned out to be Duke Adelhart, who did not expect to meet a lady here and therefore blushed deeply. "I wanted to read, and Logan let me come in here," the girl replied. Then Abelia asked what his lordship was doing there, and the man replied that he was looking for some materials. Seeing that she was looking for something, Cassis asked what book she wanted, and then Abelia saw what she was looking for. The necessary book, History of the Kingdom of Session, was immediately found, but she ended up high on the top shelf. Abelia tried to reach her, but her height proved problematic. Suddenly, her outstretched hand was covered by a strong male hand. Startled by surprise, the girl turned around slightly, and with her back she felt that the man was too close to her. "This is the book you are looking for." He handed the book to the girl. He was so close to her that the girl could not take her eyes off his red eyes. Finally answering that this was what she was looking for, Abelia thanked his lordship for his help. "Are you interested in anything else?" Cassis asked, and the girl wanted something light to read. Walking through the library, Cassis collected several books for Abelia. The girl didn't expect that he would try so hard for her. "I've picked out some light books for you," he finally said, handing her some serious works on history and strategy. Looking at the books, Abelia realized with surprise that this was what Cassis read when he wanted to relax, and she could hardly hold back her laughter. "What made you laugh?" the man asked, blushing. The girl said that these did not look like light books and explained that she meant novels. "But I find them interesting, so I will read them," said the cheerful Abelia, thanking her. Cassis blushed again when he saw how amused the girl was. She asked him to give her the books, but the man volunteered to take them to her room himself. "I want to do it," Cassis insisted, even though she refused. But she still couldn't refuse him and sincerely thanked him. The young people walked silently to the ladies' room and stopped near the door. As Cassis handed Abelia the books, his hand slid lightly over hers. Having finished his business, the man wished the lady good night, and the girl wished him the same. Abelia closed the door and leaned against it, clutching the books to her chest. She was surprised by the feelings that settled in her soul. And why are all her thoughts revolving around Cassis? Strange night. Since that day, Abelia has been searching for information about the Kingdom of Sesia. But it seems that even in the royal family, that story is just a legend. And although she spent a long time over the books, there were no results during all that time. Although during this time, Cassis received permission from the emperor for their marriage, so everything is not so bad. Speaking of marriage, Abelia remembered another important point. It seemed like it had been 2 weeks since Logan had told her about the wedding dress, so why hadn't they started making it yet? That's why, at the next tea party, when Cassis and Logan gathered, she asked the servant the question that interested her. "When Madame Olette arrives, I just wonder why nothing has been discussed about the wedding dress yet." Abelia felt awkward. It was so awkward that you would think she was looking forward to the dress. "Oh, excuse me, I forgot to tell you, you and the gentleman will visit Madame Olette's salon this weekend," the assistant answered, and the girl was surprised that they would go by themselves. Logan explained that these were Madame Olette's requirements, but if the lady was not satisfied, he could come up with something, but the girl then replied that everything was fine. And when Lady Barnane asked what about the gentleman, Logan turned to the Duke. Both the assistant and Abelia looked questioningly at Duke Adelhart. The young gentleman was so happy about the trip to the sea last time. "He will probably really enjoy a walk around the city," the girl said dreamily. But after these words, everyone present felt extremely awkward. And yet the Duke managed to express his consent they would take Lucius with them. Cassis ordered Logan to prepare everything for the trip, and Abelia was very pleased. A few days later, the time came for a trip to Madame Olette's salon. Lucius, as always, looked out the window with delight, and his attention was drawn to one sign on the building. He asked what kind of place it was, and was told that it was a cafe where they served all sorts of delicacies that the gentleman liked, which made his eyes sparkle. "Sir Logan, will we have time to stop by the cafe before we go to the salon?" Ibelia asked, and the assistant replied that they would have time after the salon and before going to the opera, so they could stop by the cafe. Ibelia told Lucius that they would definitely go to the cafe, which made the boy happy and asked if he could eat something tasty there. "Of course, I'll order you a chocolate drink," the girl smiled, and Lucius, like a real child, broke into a joyful smile. They soon arrived at Madame Olette's salon, and the bell rang as Ibelia stepped inside. There they were already met by the salon servants, led by Madame Olette herself. From the very top of the stairs, the woman greeted her guests. "So this is what she is like," Ibelia thought, feeling the greatness of this woman. "Lady Barnane, I have been expecting you," she greeted the Duke's bride separately. And they got to work straight away, the first being a Mrs. Evans dress, which is very popular now, with a closed top and lace sleeves, a cinched waist, and a full skirt. Ibelia noted that they were very beautiful, but it was not what she wanted. "Is there anything else?" she asked the master. And she explained that the Adelhart family should not blindly follow fashion, surprising Madame Olette with this. She thought Lady Barnane was a quiet person, since she never made her debut in society and lived in the Barnane family like a hermit, but she, it turns out, has character. She had a thought that it would be better to refuse the order if she were a nobody, but she still called the servants, ordering them to bring something special. Lady Barnane has changed her mind and is clearly worthy of wearing her dresses. The dress that was brought was off the shoulder and had a very bold design on the neck. It is not like all the others and will help the lady stand out from the crowd. "That's a completely different matter," Ibelia was impressed, as was Lucius, who was sitting next to her. The girl asked to make her dress based on this design, and the seamstresses started taking measurements. Madame Olette promised to come to the Adelhart estate in person, which surprised Ibelia, and explained that she would make an exception for her. "Consider this a special sign of attention. I hope we will see each other again." The fashion designer smiled. The girl sincerely thanked the lady for her care, thinking that she needed to maintain a good relationship with this woman. The bell rang again, signaling that the guests were leaving. "Well, let's go to the cafe," Ibelia announced, getting into the carriage. Soon they were already in the cafe they had passed earlier. The arriving guests were greeted with due respect. Logan reported that the Adelhart family had arrived and they were escorted to the 5th-floor terrace. Lucius was delighted from the moment they were led out onto the terrace. There was a beautiful view from there, but the girl warned the boy not to go too close to the railing. It was dangerous. Ibelia was very glad that Lucius was in a good mood. But what she didn't expect was for a man to gallantly move the chair in front of her. "Sit down, lady," Cassus decided to court the lady. Cassus froze with the chair in his hands because the girl did not move. But Ibelia was so taken aback that she simply looked into his eyes for a while and then only thanked him. Ibelia said that she had not yet had dinner and suggested that they have a snack here. The Duke volunteered to order the same as she did. Watching the man take a long time to look at the menu, she asked if his lordship liked desserts. The man hesitated, blushed, and answered with difficulty that not very much. "So you don't love me," Ibelia clarified, and this time he remained silent, blushing even more. "Then I will order my choice." The girl began to be indignant, since his words contradicted his appearance. Having made up her mind, the girl rang the bell, calling the waiter. "We would like 1 set A and B, 1 teapot of cold and hot tea, and also a chocolate cocktail with ice and a chocolate cake," Ibelia ordered. Having placed an order, the girl put the menu on the table. She noticed that Lucius was still admiring the view from the terrace. At that moment, the boy looked so happy and calm, and this did not escape the girl's keen gaze. "Your Grace, perhaps we should go out more often with the young master," said Ibelia. She understands his concerns, but the young gentleman is already 7 years old and needs to interact with his peers. He hadn't had that opportunity before, but now Ibelia was here, and she could take him out into the world and help him find friends. In fact, the girl wasn't sure that she could handle it, but she didn't want Lucius to feel lonely. And this happened, especially on those days when his only friend, Arya, could not come to visit. And he looks forward to it every day and gets very upset when it doesn't happen. Ibelia thought that she would have to persuade the Duke for a long time, but he agreed very quickly. "I agree, something is wrong." Cassis was surprised at the way the girl was looking at him. But she was just a little surprised, but even more impressed, and therefore thanked his lordship for his understanding. While they were talking, their order was already brought to them. As Ibelia began to eat, she thought that it was quite nice here, and that she should come here more often with Lucius, and that she should find out what Cassis liked. Meanwhile, the Duke was trying his best not to look at the chocolate cake that was tempting him. The cake seemed to be saying, "Eat me," through Cass's eyes. "Would you like some cake?" the girl asked, and although the man refused, she wondered if he had ever looked at her the way he looked at that cake. Lucius was bolder, and spearing a piece of cake with a fork, he handed it to the Duke. Cassis still hesitated and looked at the fork with suspicion. But finally, he opened his mouth and put a piece of chocolate cake in it, and with barely concealed delight he chewed the dessert. Ibelia thought that he didn't order dessert because the previous Duke didn't allow him to have sweets. "We'd like another chocolate cake, please," she called to the waiter. When a new portion of cake was brought, the girl pushed it towards the Duke, inviting him to help himself. The man refused again, although his eyes were literally devouring him. Ibelia urged him to at least try. "Dukes can have chocolate cake too," she said, and with a smile she added that she was pleased to see him so happy and suggested that he not be shy. Once again struck down by her bright smile, the Duke blushed and then picked up his fork. Having eaten a piece of cake, Cassis felt an indescribable pleasure, which was immediately reflected on his stern face. "Dad, you're just like me," Lucius said cheerfully. "It seems that Cassis Adelhard also has his weaknesses," Ibelia said cheerfully. They returned home at sunset and were quite tired. Logan asked if the gentleman had enjoyed the opera, and the Duke replied that he had had a wonderful time, although Ibelia had slept through most of it. The carriage arrived at the Adelhard estate already in the dark. Cassis got out of the carriage carrying the sleeping Lucius in his arms. Ibelia was about to get out of the carriage on her own, but froze on the threshold. A strong male hand reached out to her, offering help. "Give me your hand." Cassis wanted to help the girl, despite the fact that he had a sleeping child in his arms. Ibelia stopped in surprise, not knowing what to do. Then she extended her hand in response with gratitude. The girl walked slowly from the carriage to the house. It was nice outside. There was an almost full moon in the sky, and she remembered that the full moon was coming soon, and Lucius always gets sick during the full moon, usually once every 3 or 4 months. In the past, everything was fine, and she hoped that this month too, everything would go well. But contrary to her wishes, the full moon brought some problems, and young Master Lucius Adelhard became very ill. Ibelia wanted to look after the young master herself, but Cassis said that a nanny would take care of him. "No, I want to do it myself," the girl insisted. The Duke was amazed by the bride's selflessness, and he agreed but asked that Lucius be changed by a nanny. Ibelia agreed, but wondered why the nanny had to change his clothes. Did the Duke really think it would be difficult for her? The boy groaned in his sleep, suffering from a high fever, while Ibelia wiped the sweat from his face. And in order to bring down the body temperature, the girl decided to wipe him completely. However, as soon as the girl reached for her clothes, her hand froze. Although the Duke said that the nanny should change his clothes, she can unbutton the buttons herself. But what she saw made her freeze in surprise. "What is this?" A dark drawing of the sun and moon appeared on the child's body. At that moment, Cassis returned to the room with a stack of towels and froze on the threshold. "Did you see?" asked the Duke, while the girl tried to justify herself by saying that she wanted to wipe the young gentleman. Ashamed of her disobedience, Ibelia apologized and was very sorry that she had decided to act so willfully. But the Duke stopped her stream of regrets, saying that it was his fault. He himself should have told her everything earlier, because she would become Lucius's mother and should know about this. "This is a secret between Lucius and me," the Duke began. But the girl stopped him, saying that she couldn't just listen to his secret, and she offered to take a magical oath of secrecy, although Cassis believed that he could not ask her about such a thing. "No, I'm going to leave someday anyway, so it's better to take an oath," the lady insisted. And her words stunned the man to the depths of his soul. And then he was overcome with sadness. He didn't know how he would live without her. After all, Ibelia was right. She would leave someday. The Adelhard family mage performed the ritual, and Cassis continued his story. "Lucius is cursed. On the night of the full moon, the mark she saw appears on his left chest, after which he begins to have a fever. He and the magician decided that it was a curse passed down through the paternal line, which is why Cassis was looking for his father. So there is a curse in the royal family of Cessia?" Ibelia asked, and the Duke answered in the affirmative. However, they have not yet found a way to remove it from the young master. But Ibelia was interested in how to bring down the fever, to which the Duke replied that it would go down on its own in a few days, but until then they could do nothing. The girl was worried that Lucius was suffering so much and they couldn't do anything. But then it dawned on the girl that there was one way to bring down the fever. The next day, Ibelia sent a letter to her friends. The recipient looked at the letter from Lady Barnane with surprise. The answer to Abelius's desire to help Lucius lay in the hands of Samuel's family. A few days after sending the letter to Samuel, he and Arya arrived to visit Lucius. The girl burst into the Adelhard estate like a hurricane, screaming that she had heard that Lucy was sick. Samuel explained that she had been so eager to come that he could not refuse, even though he warned her that she might get infected. Ibelia volunteered to take them briefly to Lucius's room, and on the way Samuel asked how he was feeling. "He's not very good," the girl answered truthfully. The boy opened his eyes with difficulty, hearing someone persistently calling his name. "Lucy, why are you sick?" Arya burst into tears. Sitting by the boy's bed, she asked him not to get sick because she didn't like it when he was sick. "I'm not sick. I feel much better when you're around." Lucius smiled. But the girl pounced on him, ordering him not to lie because it hurt him. "Don't get sick, Lucy." Arya took the boy's hand and pressed it to her chest. Several tears fell one after another onto the boy's tender skin and were then absorbed. And at that moment, a bright glow emanated from Lucius in waves. Ibelia and Lucius, who were standing nearby, looked at everything in shock. And Arya even stopped crying, and also looked at her hands in surprise. Ibelia was the first to come to her senses and hurried to check Lucius's temperature. She lightly touched the boy's forehead, expecting it to be hot. And to her surprise, she discovered that the fever had subsided and Lucius was completely healthy. Did Arya somehow lift the curse on Lucius? Seeing the light coming from Arya, the adults asked the high priest, who was brought in to heal Lucius, to examine her. "So, Your Eminence, what about Arya?" Samuel and Ibelia asked. The first thing the priest asked was whether Lady Arya often suffered from fever, and Samuel was shocked. How did he know this? The young man remembered all the moments when he worried about his younger sister. She felt better after they started giving her Talana flowers, but before she was often sick, she got sick every time she was worried or ran a lot. And although the girl was shown to other priests, they found nothing. Which is not surprising because Lady Arya has very strong divine power, the priest explained. Even stronger than many priests, which is why they simply could not feel her. People like her are usually chosen as saints. "You mean to say that Arya was sick because of her strong divine power?" the young man asked, and the priest replied that her body was not able to cope with such powerful energy. And when the elder brother asked what should be done so that she would not get sick, he answered that it would be best to send her to the temple so that she would learn to control her power. "No, I want Arya to live a normal life," Samuel said, and Ibelia partly understood why he decided so. The life of a saint is full of trials, and the Denoa family will be in the spotlight, all of which must happen when Arya comes of age. It seems she had a lot of involvement in the course of events in this story. In that case, the priest suggested visiting the estate of the Marquis of Denoa regularly, if Sir Samuel did not mind. "It would be a great honor for us," the young man replied, and the priest replied with a smile that he would let me know when he could come. A few days later, Cassis wanted to thank Samuel for curing Lucius. But Samuel sheepishly asked to allow Arya to be friends with Lucius, after which Cassis allowed the girl to stay at the estate for a few days. The children played quietly and talked in Lucius's room. Arya asked why Lady Eve lived here, surprising Lucius. Earlier, the girl also asked her brother to allow Lady Eve to live with them. But he said that she can only come to visit. Then why can she live with Lucius? "Because she will soon marry my father," the boy beamed. Arya then asked if this meant that his dad and Lady Eve loved each other, which greatly puzzled Lucius. "How can you not know? In fairy tales it is written that people only marry those they love." Arya was surprised. Lucius thought that she was certainly right. The princess and the prince fell in love, got married, and lived happily ever after. So Lady Eve and his father will be happy too. "Your Grace, did you have fun?" Ibelia asked as she put Lucius to bed that evening. She added that Lady Arya was sleeping now and he should sleep too. But the boy had a question for her, and the girl was ready to listen to it. "Do you love my father?" Lucius asked bluntly. Arya said that people only marry those they love, and that's how it's written in fairy tales too. And since Lady Eve and Dad are getting married, it can be assumed that they love each other. For the first second the girl froze. In general, the boy's words sounded logical. But the more she realized, the more she blushed. What can she do? She can't destroy the childish faith in Lucius's love. But she doesn't love Cassis, at least not in the way Lucius thinks. But Ibelia can't say that under any circumstances. Even if she was threatened with death, she would never be able to. The more the girl thought about it, the more she blushed. And the more Ibelia remained silent, the sadder Lucius became. "You don't love Dad?" he asked, almost crying. And the girl had to loudly answer that no, he loves her. But she immediately regretted her words, because the boy was already interested in how much. "As much as you love heaven and earth?" the child asked naively. The girl was touched by how happy he was and replied that yes, that much so. "But young master, let this be our secret," Ibelia asked. Lucius naively asked why it was necessary to keep this a secret, and the girl hesitated. Cassis won't believe it anyway, but she's still embarrassed, and what if he misunderstands her? "Because I'm ashamed," she finally answered, and the boy agreed. Let it be their secret, and they sealed the promise with their fingers. The next day, the young gentleman had a fencing lesson given by the Duke. The boy thought with a grin that Lady Eve loved her dad. This smile did not escape Cassis's notice. He asked his son why he was smiling. Maybe he didn't like the lesson. Lucius was afraid that his and Eve's secret was at risk, but he thought about something else. "And Dad, he also loves Lady Eve, but what if Dad doesn't love her?" The boy looked closely at his dad and decided to ask his question. "And you love Lady Eve?" Lucius stunned Cassis. The man was not going to answer this question, and even got a little angry, saying that such things cannot be asked, but the boy did not let him finish. "Lady Eve said she loved you." He instantly revealed the secret. Cassis froze, and since he was standing with his back turned, Lucius did not see that his father's face and ears had turned very red. That same evening, Ibelia read the young master a bedtime story. Lucius had been feeling happy all day, and even now he couldn't help but burst into laughter. "Something happened, young master. You look so happy," the girl asked, and the boy said contentedly that his father also loved Lady Eve. Ibelia was dumbfounded when she heard such words from Lucius. Papa and Lady Eve love each other. Lucius was happier than ever in his life. Soon, the boy fell asleep, tired from such an emotional day, and the lady quietly wished him good night. But she could not forget his words about love. Could Duke Adelhart really love her? Could that be true? And what should she do with this information now? The Duke's office was not very peaceful either. Although Cassis was sorting through the documents, his thoughts were occupied with something else. An image of a sparkling girl appeared before his eyes. The man dreamed that this beautiful girl was leaning towards him and whispering in his ear, "Duke, I love you." Cassis blushed, feeling his heart ready to burst out of his chest. The documents fell from his hands. The assistant called the gentleman in vain, but Cassis seemed not to notice anything. Something happened. He woke up, but Logan, noticing the Duke's strange state, said that he would come later. Left alone, Cassis was worried about why he told Lucius this, and if he really loved her, what should he do then? They can't be together, but why does he feel good that she has feelings for him? Cassis really wants to ask why she said she loved him? And intending to do this at once, he went out into the corridor, where he met Ibelia. The young people couldn't look each other in the eye because of what they had recently learned. Ibelia decided that Cassis said this simply so as not to upset Lucius. "Your Grace, the young master was just joking, so don't pay attention to it," she said, making excuses. And without giving Cassis a chance to say anything, she left, wishing him good night. The Duke, stunned, digested her words, deciding that it might be for the best. She always said that she would leave, and she constantly reminds me of it. And they only have a marriage of convenience. They will get divorced anyway, so it's for the best. But how could she say that she loved him, just as a joke? Did she really decide to play with his feelings? But why? What was all this for? Meanwhile, a different story was unfolding at Count Barnon's estate. The servants helped the Count's invited guest out of the carriage. Lady Catherine arrived at the Barnane mansion personally at the invitation of the Earl. The servant led the guest straight to the Count's office, and the girl walked smiling. Finally, she will enter the capital's high society. Catherine is the daughter of the Eaters family, which, unlike the Barnanes, is not at all rich. They did not have the money to live in the capital, so she could only dream of high society. She believed that she did not deserve such a life, and now she would enter high society and become, at least, the wife of the Marquis if the Count helped her. Earlier, Baron Eaters asked his cousin, Count Barnane, for help, but he refused him, tearing up the letter asking for help. However, a few days ago, Baron Eaters received a message from the Count, in which he asked to send Catherine to the capital as soon as possible. Long time no see, Count. The girl was happy and looking forward to a new life. Count Barnane greeted her, noting that they had not seen each other for 5 years. "You have grown so much, become a stately lady since you arrived." The Count showed politeness, and the girl answered with a smile that she could not think about the road since he called her so urgently. "Okay, then let's get down to business. Do you remember Ibelia?" the man asked. Catherine froze in surprise, feeling anger rising in her soul. Are we really going to talk about that pathetic girl? The Eaters family is certainly not rich, but they are no worse than some illegitimate child, although she is still his only daughter. He probably wants to use Ibelia to make a profitable marriage and marry her off to someone from a rich family, but it doesn't seem like that. "Of course I remember, why not?" she asked, hiding her anger. But her face changed when the Count added that Abelia was engaged to Duke Adelhard and the wedding was in a month and a half. Catherine sarcastically asked if she needed to be her bridesmaid, and the Earl wondered if that would be enough for her. Catching the look in Count Barnan's eyes, Catherine realized that she was there for a reason. "No, I don't look like a bridesmaid at all," she smiled. Laughing, the man replied that that was what he liked about her, so he would ask her directly, "Catherine, do you want to become Duchess Adelhard?" This question made her eyes widen in surprise. The Adelhard family is one of the most noble families in the empire. The current duke has an illegitimate child, but when she gives birth to an heir, everyone will forget about him. Yes, wealth and fame are what Catherine dreamed of her whole life. But how the duke is engaged to Abelia, she wondered, but the count said that the engagement could be broken, and he will make sure that Catherine becomes Duchess of Adelhard. Having said this, Count Barnan became lost in his thoughts. Cassius Adelhard, how dare he contradict him? Maybe he just fell in love with this girl, that's why he's acting so strange. But if Abelia can't give him what he wants, he will be forced to send her back. Besides, love is a fleeting feeling, the man thought, and announced that he had a plan. A few days later, the morning at the Adelhard estate began with a commotion. Abelia was very surprised, but the maid gave the lady a newspaper in which Lady Barnane was written in large letters, and there was a provocative photograph. Assuming that this was an article about how she had recently been with Cassis at the opera, the girl picked up the newspaper, but she was horrified when she read the words and looked at the photograph. She was seen kissing other men at the masquerade ball, and Abelia almost choked with indignation. "This is slander. They want to make you quarrel, madam," the maid worried. The girl asked Annie to calm down and asked Logan if his lordship knew about this. Cassius knew and was very angry. Abelia knew there was a reason for this, but it was not true, and the servants knew it. However, at that moment, Logan handed the lady a letter from the Trevish newspaper, which had published the article. It said that these were not rumors. They had many witnesses who saw the lady at the masquerade ball. "But I wasn't there," the girl said indignantly. It seems that someone pretended to be Abelia, and the girl realized that this was the work of Count Barnan. She perked up, wanting to talk to him urgently, but Logan asked the lady to wait while he sorted things out himself. Abelia insisted that it concerned her and still wanted to get to the bottom of it. Logan understood everything, but added that this is why he was here, and asked the lady to simply trust him. "What should I do then?" Abelia worried, and when the knight asked her, just in case, not to leave the house and not to receive guests, she sadly agreed. Evening fell upon the land and enveloped the Barnan mansion in darkness. But inside the house, secret affairs were taking place against the backdrop of the newspaper article. What fools they were to believe such nonsense. It was not for nothing that she bribed the reporter. "Something interesting is brewing," Catherine said cheerfully. A few days later, a visitor arrived at the Adelhard estate to see Lady Abelia. But the girl was not expecting anyone, especially since the visitor did not give his name, so she ordered him to be sent away. "I don't accept strangers," Abelia added, remembering Logan's orders. It seems that this stranger heard something at the ball, and that is why he decided to come here. Meanwhile, the Trevisi newspaper also had a visitor at its editorial office. He came straight to the editor-in-chief's office with a serious conversation. The uninvited visitor was so frightening that the editor-in-chief did not dare look at him, and this visitor was Duke Adelhard himself, and very displeased. "You know why I came," said Cassis, having previously refused tea. The editor suggested that it was because of today's article, and the Duke sternly asked since when newspapers had started spreading gossip. "What gossip? We have evidence." The man was indignant. The Duke listened to him calmly, saying that it was unimportant, and the masquerade was only one of the reasons for his coming. Who came up with the idea of writing about this in the newspaper? The Duke's tone was so terrifying that the editor turned pale and began to shake slightly. But the man did not calm down, insisting that the girl in the photograph had pink hair, to which the Duke retorted that it could be dyed, or a wig could be put on. And the editor hesitated because this really could have happened. "Lady Barnane is under my protection at the Adelhard estate, and everyone at the estate can testify that she did not leave during the night," Cassis said. The Duke rose and promised that the newspaper would pay for such slander. "Mr. Duke, have mercy, we will publish a refutation, I beg you." The editor was frightened. However, Duke Adelhard was very angry. "Remember once and for all, no one dares to defame the name of Adelhard." The man's eyes flashed with anger. Meanwhile, Abelia decided to speak with Count Barnane personally, and she arrived at the estate accompanied by Annie. The girl was very surprised when she met someone in the house. "Long time no see, Abelia," Catherine said mockingly. And when Abelia called her by name, she became angry, saying that she should call her Lady Baroness Eaters. To which Abelia herself noted that there was no need for formalities. They were still relatives. Catherine noted that she was right in some way, since Abelia would soon become Duchess of Adelhart. Abelia noticed several long pink hairs on Catherine's dark clothes, and she was also embarrassed by her relative's excessive self-confidence. Realizing that something was fishy, Abelia became angry. "By the way, you just came to see the Count," said Catherine, adding that he was not there now, he had gone away on business. Abelia replied that she really wanted to see the Count, since they had not met for a long time. But it's okay because in fact she came to another person. Catherine was quite puzzled by Abelia's behavior. She even hesitantly took a step back when the girl came close to her. "Did you enjoy pretending to be me?" Lady Barnon suddenly asked, leaning towards her relative. "The games are over, Catherine. Don't even hope that you'll be able to continue," she warned. And she added that Catherine would not be able to get away with it. "You're angry with me because of the scandal." Catherine pushed her away, screaming. But Abelia laughed. What nonsense, she was not angry at all. Besides, she found all this funny. "Keep pretending to be me as long as you can." Abelia turned around. However, it was time for her to go, and Lady Barnane, taking Annie with her, left the mansion. Catherine remained standing there, filled with anger and hatred. Immediately after the Barnane mansion, Abelia headed to the city on business. She looked into the tavern where Samuel was already waiting for her. "Do you know why I came?" the girl asked. And the young man answered in the affirmative, and noted that rumors were circulating throughout the empire. "But I'm on the ladies' side." Samuel smiled, for which the girl thanked him. Getting down to business, the guild leader asked if she had come because of the impostor that had appeared, and Abelia replied that she thought she knew who it was. "So that's how it is, and who is it?" the young man asked. The girl replied that it was Catherine Eaters, her relative, and that the Earl of Barnane must be behind her. "What do I need to do?" Samuel waited for instructions. Abelia wanted to start by setting up a raid on her, to catch her, so to speak, with bait. "Lady Barnane, are you sure she will come?" asked the young man standing next to the girl at the masquerade ball. The blonde, or rather Lady Abelia in a different guise, replied that they had carefully prepared a trap in advance. This morning, those around were studying the new issue of the Trevishi newspaper with interest. "Who is this girl claiming to be Abelia Barnane?" the headline asked. This morning, another publication published a statement from the Adelhart family. If Catherine sees him, she will try to hush up the scandal. So Abelia asked Samuel to follow her and find out where she was going, and that place turned out to be a masquerade ball. A little earlier, Abelia convinced the Duke that she needed to be at the ball to expose the impostor, and Cassis agreed with her plan, but made one condition. He also wanted to go with the girl to help her because it could be dangerous there. Surprised, Abelia nevertheless thanked the Duke for his concern. And now at the ball she tried not to worry, because Cassis had given permission and everything was fine. "I will wait until the girl with pink hair appears and you stay with the Duke," Samuel said. Abelia headed into the garden to await the outcome of events. She wondered where Cassis was. He was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly someone grabbed the girl by the hand. She turned around and saw a stranger standing next to her. But the man, holding her hand, led her away without looking at the girl. "Wait, who are you?" Abelia wondered, unable to break free from his grip. She even considered whether to hit this stranger. But then the man turned around and, putting his finger to his lips, asked the girl to be quieter. "Your Grace," Abelia suddenly realized, and the girl was interested in how he recognized her because she had changed everything about herself, but the man replied that now was not the time for that. The lady agreed that they now needed to catch the impostor, so she took the man by the hand and pulled him back into the hall. Cassis, who had also changed his appearance to a blonde, blushed under her pressure. A girl with long pink hair walked into the brightly lit ballroom and immediately attracted everyone's attention. She especially attracted the attention of Abelia and Cassis. "I want to spend the night with you. My name is Abelia Barnane." The stranger quickly became close to the man, who seemed to her to be random, and who turned out to be Samuel. And as soon as she said the name, Samuel tore off her pink wig and mask in one movement. Everyone present immediately turned their attention to the unfolding events. "Oh, sorry, my hand slipped." The young man apologized mockingly. Catherine was very angry at this stupid man who had exposed her so inopportunely. But before she could say anything, a couple approached them with words of greeting. "Wow, what a meeting. If you're going to pretend to be me, then do it properly." Abelia chuckled. She asked loudly so that everyone could hear which of them was the real Abelia Barnane, and she even named the impostor's real name. which horrified Catherine. Her plan had failed, and she would no longer see high society. After the impostor was exposed, it turned out that Count Barnain was behind everything that happened. Now the newspapers were full of headlines that Ibelia Barnain had proven her innocence. Cassis claimed that his fiancé had been abused by the Barnain family and had therefore cut off all ties with them. Annie was sincerely glad for her mistress that now Count Barnain could not do anything to her. In fact, Ibelia didn't know what the future would hold, but for now the Count had been banished from high society and there was no point in thinking about him, and besides, the weather was fine today. Yes, and your wedding is coming soon, the maid reminded. A few days later, Madame Olette came to the estate to try on her wedding dress. Ibelia tried it on, and everyone who saw a girl in it was indescribably delighted, which embarrassed her. All that remains is to add pearl dust and precious stones, said Madame Olette, and Ibelia shuddered. And the master explained that, by order of the Duke, the dress had to be impeccable, and there was no need to worry about the price. Ibelia heard about this for the first time and was therefore very surprised. By the way, after the recent scandal, you have become very popular in high society. You need to throw a party, the woman added. And Madame Olette was also very interested in how the lady met the Duke, and whether it was true that their marriage was for love, as the newspapers wrote. The girl decided that it was better to remain silent so as not to blurt out anything unnecessary, and replied that she was embarrassed to talk about it, so she would tell him later. After the fitting, Ibelia dropped in to see the Duke, and they drank a cup of tea together. Looking at him, the girl was surprised that he didn't even ask why she came. It seemed he had already gotten used to her sudden visits. She felt awkward starting the conversation, but she couldn't remain silent any longer. Embarrassed by what she wanted to ask, Ibelia blushed deeply. "Your Grace, we are truly marrying for love," she said, and Cassis spat out his tea in surprise. "That is, we are really in love with each other." The girl tried to formulate her question as accurately as possible. The Duke did not understand what she was talking about, but the fact that the girl spoke of love between them made his heart pound and his face turn very red. Having come to his senses, he nevertheless asked what she meant, and when Ibelia said that this is what the newspapers wrote, he explained that Logan had given them this information. "The problem is that you and I haven't discussed how we met." Ibelia hesitated again. "And when she comes out into the public eye, people will be asking about it all the time, so they have to come up with a story." Ibelia suggests the following: Duke Adelhart has come to the Barnain mansion on business. He met Ibelia there, after which he fell in love and saved her from cruel treatment. The girl subsequently reciprocated his feelings, and they decided to get married. Having described the whole story in such a colorful manner, Ibelia asked how she was getting on with Cassis. And because the man remained silent for a long time, she thought that he didn't like it. "No, it's just true," the Duke finally answered, and now the girl fell silent, stunned. Clutching the notebook in her hands, she thought that everything was really true. Well, except for the part about mutual love. "Then let's tell everything as it is," she asked nervously. And Cassis immediately agreed, blushing for some reason, and only after that, Ibelia added that she had excluded the part about love. But the way the man looked, sometimes blushing, sometimes turning pale in her presence, made the girl think. Lucius's words immediately popped into his head about how his father also loved Lady Eve, and how the boy was glad that the feelings were mutual. But could it be that Cassis really loves her? No, it can't. He probably lied so as not to upset his son. Cassis would never have loved her. Why would the Duke? But he wouldn't have lied to his son either. Then it turns out that Cassis really does have feelings for her. As if responding to the girl's mental torment, the man looked straight into her eyes, and the girl froze for a moment, mesmerized. "Well, that's what we'll do," she announced too loudly, jumping up from her seat. Considering their conversation over, Ibelia quickly left the room. Sometime later, the wedding day arrived. "Lady Eve, you are so beautiful," Lucius admired the girl. The boy said that she was as beautiful as a princess. And his father, it turns out, is a prince. The young gentleman was even more delighted. After all, princesses always marry princes, and Ibelia seemed to be shaken. For the next 3 years, she will become Duchess of Adelhart, and she finally found the new family she dreamed of. The final preparations were completed, and the veil was placed on the bride. "Well, Lady Barnain, it's time for us to go," the escort announced. And Lucius extended his small but strong hand to the girl. He pulled the slightly hesitant girl along with him. "Lady Eve, let me accompany you today," the boy smiled. The wedding ceremony took place in the capital's main temple. Ibelia, accompanied by Lucius, made her way inside to the altar. And at the end of this path, the priest was already waiting for her along with Duke Adelhart. As soon as Cassis saw his bride in a white dress and veil, he immediately blushed. The girl's heart also began to beat faster at the sight of the groom. Lucius did his part at this wedding, walking the bride down the aisle. Still holding the girl's hand, he took his father's hand with his free hand. "Your father should accompany you from here on out." The boy smiled happily. And then he joined the hands of Lady Eve and his father. Cassis blushed again, but tenderly took the delicate woman's hand into his palm. Under the veil that covered her face, Ibelia blushed, but happily placed her hand in the Duke's palm. "Today, 2 young people are getting married and taking vows in front of those present here," the priest began. Ibelia glanced at her fiancé out of the corner of her eye, wondering what was going on in his head. Was he as worried as she was, but she decided that no, because it wasn't a real wedding. No, she needs to push these thoughts away. Why does she constantly think about Cassis? And now the young people can seal their vows with a kiss. The priest concluded his speech with a smile. Ibelia froze in amazement. She hadn't expected this, but the man wasn't at all embarrassed. He carefully pushed the veil back from her face and leaned towards the girl's lips. It all lasted for a few seconds, but Ibelia had time to think that this was not part of her plans. But there was nowhere to run, and Cassis gently touched her lips with his. The kiss lasted only a moment, but was so tender that both felt unusual. Without realizing what she was doing, Ibelia placed her hand on the man's neck, and she pulled him towards her, once again merging in a kiss with her now husband. To kiss Cassis, the girl rose slightly on her toes, but when her lips touched the man, his eyes opened in surprise. Although it looked like a real kiss from the outside, in reality, Ibelia gently touched the Duke's cheek with her lips, but even this movement made the man's heart beat wildly when he felt her touch. The bell rang, announcing the creation of a new family, and white doves were released. The wedding took place quickly, and by evening, the newlyweds were at their estate. The maids helped their mistress prepare for her wedding night, and now looked at Ibelia with delight. The lady herself did not share the enthusiasm and asked if it was too revealing. Madame Olette said it was the most fashionable nightgown, the maids insisted, adding that the Duke would definitely like it. The Duchess was dressed in translucent clothing for her wedding night, but the girl sadly thought that Cassis would not come anyway. The agitated maids wished their mistress good night and left the room. Ibelia was about to go to bed, thinking that the Duke would not come anyway. But then there was a knock at the door, and the girl thought without a second thought who it could be who came so late. But when the door opened and the visitor entered, Ibelia was incredibly surprised. "Your Grace, has something happened?" she asked, looking at his tomato-red face. Trying not to look at the girl, the man replied that Logan had told him to come, and the Duchess had understood everything. It would be strange if the newlyweds slept in different rooms on their wedding night. Cassis tried his best not to look at Ibelia, but his gaze still fell on the girl's revealing nightgown. And the Duke's face turned even redder, and a stifled groan escaped from his throat. "It's all the maids!" Ibelia screamed, realizing what he was looking at and trying to cover herself with her hands. However, Ibelia herself carefully examined the man, blushing deeply as well, because Cassis had an equally transparent outfit. Having decided that there was nothing to be done now and that they would have to spend the night in the same room, the girl invited him to come through. Cassis approached the chair and announced that he would spend the night in it. "You're probably tired too, let's go to bed," Ibelia said, causing him to turn around in surprise. But then she got scared, explaining that she was suggesting that he sleep on different sides of the bed. Cassis stubbornly refused, saying that everything was fine and he would sleep in the chair, which made the girl sad. "No, everything is not all right," she took the Duke by the hand. How can she fall asleep knowing that he is not sleeping, although he is also very tired? "Please lie down on the bed for me," Ibelia asked, squeezing his hand. The newlyweds lay down in Ibelia's large bed, but at opposite ends with their backs to each other. The girl thought that she had invited him in herself. She couldn't let him spend the night sitting. She felt some movement behind her and turned around in surprise, calling out to his lordship. "You will call me that forever. We are married." Cassis turned to face his wife, but the girl immediately asked what she should call him. "Cassis," she said his name for the first time and blushed with embarrassment, and she was afraid that she had done something wrong when the Duke stared at her in surprise. "No, that's right. I just haven't heard my name for a long time." The man laughed. Ibelia seemed to have seen Duke Adelhart laugh genuinely for the first time. Mother and Julia called him that, but they died long ago. So from then on he heard only "your lordship and master," to forget the sound of his name. What could be sadder? She may not be his real wife, but at least for the duration of their contract, she can do this for him. "Then I can call you Ibelia," the man asked, surprising her. And even though this is not her real time, why is her heart beating like that? After thinking for a moment, she asked to be called simply Eve. At least the Duke and the young master can call her that. "Eve? Okay," Cassie agreed and blushed again. Deeply embarrassed, Ibelia turned away and quickly wished her husband good night. Lady too, that is, Eve. Good night to you too, Cassis said with a smile. The clock struck 2 o'clock in the morning. Ibelia was fast asleep, but Cassis could not sleep. Lucius's words about Lady Eve loving her father kept running through her head. The man's head was filled with completely opposite thoughts. Ibelia previously said it was just a joke. Even though she told him it wasn't true, she might actually have feelings for him. Then perhaps his life will have meaning again. You can cry if you want. No one had ever said such words to him before, she said with such a tender smile that she was his future wife. Her words made him want to protect her very much. She always smiles, even when she is feeling bad, and Cassis wishes that she could relax next to him, and now he is her husband. Meanwhile, at the Barnane mansion, things were not so rosy. Catherine, you useless idiot, Count Barnane was angry. This girl, through her stupidity, turned the entire high society against the Barnane family. Yes, he failed to secure the Duke's support, but he will never allow Ibelia to live in peace. One bright sunny day, Duchess Adelhart was drinking tea in the garden. "Madam, there is a letter for you," the servant said, handing Ibelia another letter. After the wedding, she began to receive invitations to tea parties she used to refuse, but now she can't do that, because she's a duchess. However, the seal on this letter caught her attention. It was a letter from the Marchioness of Evans, in which she invited Lucius too. The Marchioness of Evans is an influential figure in high society, so it wouldn't hurt for them to befriend her. "Young master, would you like to come with me to tea?" Ibelia asked Lucius, adding that there would be many children his age there. But the girl was surprised that the boy hesitated, not rushing to answer with consent. "Aria is enough for me," Lucius replied, lowering his head in shame. Ibelia was touched by how cutely the boy blushed at the mention of his friend. It seemed like they were getting even closer, and the girl said that Lucius could refuse if he didn't want to. "But the more friends the better," she added, and the boy perked up. Lucius replied that it wasn't that he didn't want to, it was difficult for him, but he still agreed to go with Lady Eve. Wonderful, Ibelia was genuinely glad that he agreed. At the appointed time, the Duchess and Lucius arrived at the Evans estate. The first to emerge from the carriage was Ibelia, wearing a beautiful white and blue dress. "Be careful, young master," she helped the boy, dressed in a suit the same color as her dress, down. "Welcome, Duchess Adelhart, you are already expected," her servant greeted her. The guests were then led to the tea-drinking place in the garden, where a fully laid table was already set, and Ibelia was the last of the guests to arrive. As they approached Lucius, the other noble ladies looked at the newly minted duchess with interest. However, all of Ibelia's attention was focused only on the mistress of the house. "Welcome, Duchess Adelhart," Marchioness Evans greeted her sincerely. The girl, like Lucius, sincerely thanked them for the invitation, although the Marchioness considered it an honor for her that they decided to come. "My son Anthony was very much looking forward to meeting the young Duke," the Marchioness added, which made the boy feel embarrassed. "The landlady said that the maid would take him to Anthony." "Then, Lady Eve, I will go?" Lucius smiled. Ibelia was glad that Lucius was in a good mood, and hoped that he would find many friends here. Lucius stood to the side while the other children played happily nearby. They didn't pay any attention to him, and Lucius himself, not used to communicating with his peers, was very shy. Maybe they were avoiding him because he was a bastard, the boy thought. But then someone greeted him. "Hello, what is your name?" "I am Anthony Evans." The young Marquis was the first to speak to him. Lucius was so taken aback that he didn't even immediately respond to the greeting. "I'm Lucius, just call me Lucy," he answered quickly. "Hey, Anthony, what are you doing there? Let's go play hide-and-seek." The third boy intervened in their conversation, and Anthony immediately invited Lucy to play with them, but he was scared. After all, as he thought, the other children hated him. It was clear from their sidelong glances. The third boy, Thomas, asked with displeasure why Anthony had called him. "I don't want to be friends with him. Bastards are disgusting," Thomas said, and Lucius was overcome with anger, and in a changed voice he asked again what he had said. "I said you were a bastard, and yes, your fake mother was also a bastard," added the evil boy. "You and that pathetic duchess are a perfect couple," the child repeated the words of the adults. Lucius couldn't take it anymore, and unable to restrain himself, he attacked Thomas with his fists. Meanwhile, the ladies were discussing the story of the Duke and Duchess's meeting over tea. It was so romantic. One of the ladies was especially delighted, but Ibelia immediately sensed the falseness in her words. "Well, the Duke is raising an illegitimate child, so this is not surprising," the woman said in all seriousness, and Ibelia became wary. Did she just mean that since Cassis was raising a bastard, it was no wonder that he fell in love with an illegitimate girl? Ibelia could barely contain the anger and indignation that was bursting out. She doesn't care what she says about her, but she won't let her insult Lucius. "Madam, the words you said earlier," began Duchess Adelhart, but she was interrupted by a child's shrill cry, and all the ladies instantly turned around. "Oh my God, son, what happened?" The same lady was rushing towards her son, who was sitting on the ground. Ibelia also approached the children and called Lucius. Thomas threw himself into his mother's arms with a heart-rending cry, and the woman tried to find out what had happened. "Lucius hit me." The boy turned around, accusingly pointing his finger at the young duke. The young duke, his eyes sparkling with anger, did not deny anything. Thomas continued to accuse Lucius of just going and hitting him. It was true that the young duke had done wrong, and the other children had seen what had happened and were now blaming Lucius. Ibelia looked silently at the upset Lucius. Then she sat down and stretched out her hands to him. She doesn't know what happened, but she's sure of one thing. "Come to me, young duke," said the girl, confident that Lucius would not do this without a reason. But the boy did not move from his place, although he even shook his head. His eyes spoke of great mental pain, and he could barely hold back tears. He looked off to the side, and this did not escape Ibelia. She also turned in the direction Lucius was looking. "Mom, he hit me," Thomas cried in his mother's tender embrace. Ibelia immediately understood what Lucius was thinking about. She called the boy by name, knowing full well that he wanted maternal warmth. "Lucy, come to your mother." These words brought tears to the child's eyes. Unable to contain his emotions, Lucius threw himself into Ibelia's arms, calling her mother. "Yes, Lucy, Mom is here," she consoled the boy, stroking his back and hugging him. Through tears, the boy asked if she was really his mother and if he could call her that. "Of course," Ibelia answered. She wanted to become his mother from the very beginning. She only regrets that she was so late with this. When the boy calmed down a little, the girl asked him to tell her what happened. "Thomas said that my mother and I were bastards and that Lady Eve was not my mother at all," Lucius replied. Thomas's mother, hearing this, asked her son in fear if he had really said that, but the boy was surprised, because it was true. "Countess?" Ibelia approached them, and her voice did not bode well. The woman tried to say that the Duchess had misunderstood, but the girl interrupted her. "The Adelhart family will never forget what happened today," the Duchess warned. The Countess was seriously frightened and tried to assure her that the Duchess was too frightened, and that this was just childish pranks, but Ibelia asked her a question. Ibelia sincerely believed that children were a reflection of their parents, and Thomas would not have said such a thing without permission. "Can you swear to God and say in front of everyone that you never said anything like that about Lucius or her?" In front of Thomas, Ibelia asked bluntly. "Forgive me, Duchess. I have raised my son poorly. Please forgive him," the Countess begged. But Ibelia repeated what she had said earlier. The Adelhart family would never forget it. After everything had calmed down, the ladies went home to their estates. And Madame Evans asked them and Lucy to stay with her for a little while longer. Anthony was very eager to play with the young duke, and Madame herself wanted to heal Lucy's wounds as an apology. Ibelia saw no reason to refuse, since she herself wanted to get to know Madame Evans better. Anthony is a good and kind boy, and Madame Evans also turned out to be a very pleasant woman. Even though they had only spent a few hours together, she could already say with confidence that they would become friends. They returned home when it was already completely dark. Ibelia lay down on the bed with a feeling of great tiredness. Something like this would probably happen all the time when she went out into the world. Suddenly there was a knock at the door and the girl allowed entry. It was Cassius Adelhart himself, slightly flushed. They decided that they would sleep in the same room 3 times a week and did it because of the rumors. Nothing has changed since they started sleeping in the same room. They don't even really talk. Although no, something did change. Gradually, she got used to Cassis's presence. Sitting down on the bed, the Duke asked what had happened that afternoon, but the girl replied that nothing special. She somehow did not want to disturb him. But Cassis covered the girl's hand with his own and leaned over, looking into her face. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Ibelia was embarrassed. After examining her carefully, Cassis added that she looked upset. The girl was very surprised by the man's attentiveness and insight. She eventually told Cassis what had happened at the Evans estate, and also that she felt uneasy because she blurted out of anger that the Adelharts would not forget this, which surprised Cassis. She didn't know if she had the right to say such a thing. "I'm not the real Duchess Adelhart after all," Ibelia explained, and these words upset the man a little. Ibelia continued to say that she had no right to speak on behalf of the family. But Cassis interrupted her, saying that everything was wrong, forcing the girl to look at himself. "Eve, you have the right to speak on behalf of the Adelharts," the Duke explained. "After all, her name is Ibelia Adelhart, and that speaks for itself." Then the tone of his voice changed, Cassis adding that those people were most likely discussing more than just Lucius. "Eve, tell me, are you okay?" Cassis asked, to the girl's amazement.